Sooner or later, everyone reaches the point where they get to experience such a significant event as an entrance exam. That moment has arrived for the applicants at Valkyrie Public School. Every year, the school holds a qualifying exam to select as many of the best students as possible. Their first challenge will be to defeat goblins, and they should also keep in mind that the exam is being broadcast live, so that anyone who wants to can vote for their favorite candidate. Their future effectively depends on their performance on this exam, so they need to give it their all to earn the highest grade and get into the top class. Of course, there were many talented students who exuded a sense of destructive power. There were also those who specialized in martial arts, and their elegant fighting style captivated the audience. And among them were those who possessed both martial arts skills and destructive power, making them stand out quite impressively against the rest. Strange as it may seem, there is a hierarchy based on strength at the academy, and the strong, as a rule, easily attain fame and wealth. For the weak, however, the opposite is true. This is exactly what happened to our main character, the young Asahi Hinata. He was so weak and clumsy that he couldn't even fight back against low-ranking goblins. Weaklings like him weren't particularly valuable, but he was different from them. He was distinguished by his astonishing weakness. He couldn't even lift a twig to defend himself against monsters in any way. And all of this was because of his special suit, which he had received as a personal artifact. So in this situation, all he could do was endure the goblins' attacks. But he was so stubborn that at one point he decided to take off the suit and fight without it. It was a very reckless move, and watching it, the spectators were beside themselves with surprise. His humiliation was broadcast nationwide, and that was enough to land him in the lowest class. From that day on, his terrible school life began. None of this would have happened if, at one point, unknown monsters hadn't invaded the world. In just a couple of years, they managed to wreak havoc across the entire planet, and conventional weapons proved ineffective against them. So for many, the only option was to resign themselves to their fate. However, hope emerged in the form of sacred artifacts. People learned to manifest weapons from their own souls, which they used to fight the monsters. Hinata's father was a hero who wielded a shield, and the young man dreamed of becoming just like him. But in an instant, his whole life changed again, while his father was fighting the monsters. They were cornered, and his father told his son to grab his friend and flee to safety. His father considered him strong and was confident that the boy would be able to protect everyone. As a small child, Hinata wasn't particularly inspired by his words. After all, watching your father stand on the brink of death isn't exactly the best childhood memory. And yet he trusted his father, took Shizuku's hand, she was trying to pull his mother out from under the rubble, and together they ran away. From that moment on, Hinata began training to become strong and protect the people he loved. His father's words were deeply etched in his memory and became the fuel for his motivation. But after studying for half a year at an elite school for warriors, the young man came to realize something. In this life, not everyone achieves what they desire through long effort and training. There are also those who are born with it. That's why such people often look down on those who are weaker than them. That's exactly what happened to Hinata. A person without a shred of talent became an outcast. It didn't matter what kind of person he really was. In the eyes of others, he was nothing more than a weak, good-for-nothing. None of the other students wanted to even talk to him, let alone be friends with him. Hinata's school days turned into a living hell. Even the girl who was supposedly his friend, whom he'd known since early childhood and whom he'd once saved. Despite all this, she no longer noticed him and ignored him in every way possible. On that day, Shizuku had also lost someone close to her, and until they entered high school, they remained friends, weathering all difficulties together. But after entering the academy, everything changed drastically for the worse. And that wasn't surprising, since Shizuku was a top student who possessed a powerful artifact. Meanwhile, compared to her, Hinata was just a loser with a second-rate artifact. Over time, he grew accustomed to the scornful glances and the way people treated him. Even when he returned to class, he couldn't relax or prepare for the lesson. His hostile friends were already waiting for him there. The rest of the class ignored everything that was happening to Hinata. Everyone with a low power rating and a weak artifact ended up in Class E, just like him. Students like these usually had no motivation, and the teachers had long since given up on them. Simply put, Class E was considered the school's real dumping ground. And right in the middle of it all was Hinata, who was beaten up every day by Takayuki Kurimura. Using artifacts was permitted only in specially designated areas, but the students in this class didn't care about school rules, so Kurimura, who possessed the gloves artifact, used it to beat up Hinata. Even in a class as low as Class E, Hinata was at the very, very bottom. Half a year had already passed, and his life was getting worse and worse. Some students tried to stop Kurimura, but it was useless. After all, he was just your typical school bully who, once he'd picked a target, wouldn't let up. Of course, the other students were curious. Why had Kurimura singled him out? The fact was that it was because of him that Hinata ended up in Class E. After the Goblin trial, there was a mock battle, and Hinata became his opponent. He stubbornly refused to give up and kept Kurimura in a tight grip. As a result, both received low grades and ended up in the lowest ranked class. Hinata's determination and refusal to give up ultimately backfired on him. But even in that situation, he kept smiling, looking his opponent straight in the eye. His behavior annoyed Kurimura even more, driving him into a rage. Despite this, Hinata reaped his own benefits from the constant beatings, all because of his artifact. The thing is, his artifact is a kind of shield, and in order to level up its abilities, he had to take damage. For the past 6 months, he had endured Kurimura's taunts so that one day he could become stronger and take his revenge. Kurimura would go out of his way to make hurtful remarks, for example, about Hinata's parents, insinuating that if artifacts were inherited, then his parents must have been just as worthless as the owners of useless artifacts. He also added that he'd like to meet them and beat them up, just as he had beaten Hinata. These words cut Hinata deeply, but he still couldn't do anything in response. No matter how strong his desire to strike his tormentor, he simply couldn't allow himself to do so. Even when someone tried to object to Kurimura, he quickly put them in their place. That was Hagane Shu for you. As a result, the other students also had to endure humiliation and obey his orders. So one day, Kurimura ordered Shu to pick up a chair and hit Hinata as proof of his loyalty. Without a second thought, Shu obeyed the order, hitting Hinata on the head with all his might, even though deep down he didn't want to. This blow turned out to be a tenfold strike for Hinata, which unlocked new features of his artifact. But Hinata didn't know this yet, since he still hadn't fully figured out his artifact. He considered himself too weak, since even after training, his efforts hadn't paid off. However, in an instant, everything changed for the better for him. Hinata was able to upgrade his artifact as a reward for the damage he had taken. His weakling suit transformed into the indomitable suit. Before that, the young man believed that since his efforts weren't being rewarded, he had to keep going until the very end. Thanks to his perseverance, he was finally able to earn a reward and get closer to his goal. 6 months ago, he learned about some of the unique features of his suit. His score on the entrance exam was terrible, and if he hadn't taken action, he would have been expelled. After all, Valkyrie is a school that is funded by residents' taxes, so it's no surprise that if a student doesn't show potential, they're expelled. Without government support, such students become nobodies, just like Hinata, in fact. But he wasn't about to give up. He found a way to improve his artifact. It was known that constant use of an artifact strengthens it over time, but at that point, Hinata didn't yet understand what abilities his suit possessed. If the suit really was useless, he'd remain a weakling. He couldn't afford to give up now. He had to fight to become stronger. In theory, it all sounded simple and motivating, but in practice, it was much more difficult. Hinata still hadn't managed to defeat even a single goblin, but he didn't lose hope. He remembered that people used to fight monsters with firearms, but now they had to do it with their bare hands. He considered taking off the suit and fighting with a stick, but then the artifact would be useless, and he needed to deal damage while staying in the suit. Then he remembered that if he touched an object he couldn't use, he'd be struck by a powerful energy pulse, from which the suit protected him. Hinata decided to turn this weakness to his advantage, and he succeeded. The pain was unbearable, but he managed to kill his first goblin. While the other students were mowing down hordes of goblins, Hinata barely managed to defeat a single one. It was humiliating. Nevertheless, he succeeded, and his first magic crystal dropped from the monster. The young man even thought he would drop dead right there, so he didn't want to use that technique again. But after all that effort, he'd obtained the crystal, and as soon as he picked it up, it vanished. Instead, a system window popped up with a message stating that he had successfully absorbed the magic stone. The system had been updated, and a new quest had appeared: to deal 10,000 damage. Half a year had passed since then, and now the moment had come for Hinata to upgrade his suit. But he didn't know how to do it. While browsing the system settings, he discovered that he could control the suit with his voice, and that the keyword for upgrading was update. Hinata uttered the long-awaited word, and his suit immediately began to change. Now it was no longer the weakling suit, but the indomitable suit, which differed from the previous one in more than just its appearance. Hinata was surprised, since he'd never heard of an artifact that changed its appearance before, and he wanted to find out what changes had occurred in its abilities. A window with his stats appeared on the screen, but the numbers, 14 for strength and 18 for stamina, didn't exactly thrill him. On the other hand, the new suit gave him incredible strength and protection. Nevertheless, he wanted to test out the new suit, and where better to do that than in a portal full of monsters? His opponents were still the same goblins, but now Hinata was confident he could defeat them. However, he wasn't alone in the portal. Shizuku was there as well. While killing a single goblin was already an achievement for Hinata, for her, they weren't even worth warming up on. Still, she was quite surprised to see Hinata, who had also come to train. Standing next to her was her friend and classmate, Sachi Shirahane. She asked Shizuku what she had seen there. The girl replied that it was nothing, just an empty spot, so there was no need to worry. Still, Sachi noticed Hinata, pointing out that he was the very same guy who had caused the exam broadcast to be interrupted. But Shizuku didn't appreciate her sense of humor, saying that if she liked making fun of people so much, she should drop out of school and become a clown. Sachi asked why she was so angry, but Shizuku replied that she wasn't angry at all, just annoyed. Hinata's stubbornness annoyed her. After all, there's a limit to everything, so why can't he seem to get that? However, Sachi still didn't understand why Shizuku hated him so much. She merely noted that his costume seemed to have changed since the exam. Meanwhile, the young man continued to train. This time, he managed to block the goblin's attack. The suit's defense had indeed improved, and although he took damage, that didn't stop him from trying to counterattack. But in reality, things turned out differently. The goblin easily knocked him off his feet, slamming his face into the ground. Hinata was disappointed. His plan hadn't worked. He could withstand the blows, but he couldn't defeat his opponent. He wondered if he should try the same move again, just like the first time. Suddenly, the goblins began to clone themselves, and when he tried to run away, they immediately caught up with him. Hinata hoped that someone would save him, but then he remembered his father's words. In a critical situation, it's useless to ask for help. You have to rely only on yourself. He needed to be strong, to become a hero who could save others in times of trouble. That was exactly the kind of hero Hinata wanted to become. But if he died now at the hands of low-level monsters, his dream would come to an end. So despite his fear and doubts, he decided to use the painful technique again. Thanks to this, he managed to buy himself a little time to run away and come up with a new plan. The only problem was that he couldn't use this technique again, but it seemed he wouldn't need to this time. A message appeared in the system window. The suit had responded to his will and unlocked a new skill. Revenge. Activated by a keyword. This skill converts accumulated damage into power and releases it for 10 seconds, but it can only be used once a day. Hinata had no time to think. He immediately decided to activate it. As he spoke the keyword, he felt his body begin to change dramatically. He felt a surge of power and, without hesitation, struck the monster. Then, without pausing, he charged at the rest of the goblin horde to wipe them all out. Hinata had to act quickly and deliberately, since the skill lasted only 10 seconds. However, in that short time, he managed to defeat all the goblins. But this ability had another drawback. In addition to its limited duration and long cooldown, such a pace severely drained his body. Nevertheless, it could become his trump card in critical situations, even if only once a day, and provided he had taken damage. In the future, he would have to use this ability constantly, but he couldn't keep taking damage forever. Besides, Hinata still didn't know all the capabilities of his artifact. The transformation of the suit felt like an upgrade, and he could sense how its stats had changed. He wondered, if this was a feature of his artifact, perhaps he really would become stronger in the future. Meanwhile, a magic crystal dropped from yet another goblin. After absorbing it, he unlocked a new feature of the suit, an upgrade list, which would allow him to become even stronger. After a short rest, Hinata resumed his training, continuing to attack the goblins. Now, he no longer had to use that painful move to defeat them. Thanks to the suit's new upgrades and abilities, he had grown stronger. He finally managed to defeat the hobgoblin and obtain a crystal from it. Now, Hinata could use the hobgoblin's club without fear of the energy pulse. As a reward for his victory, he received permission to equip the weapon, unlocked the resistance to blows and adaptation to clothing skills, and boosted his core stats. Hinata noticed that his artifact had improved significantly after so many upgrades. However, he was only able to boost his stamina the most. A list of quests also became available to him, allowing him to gradually strengthen his suit. Usually the quests involved killing goblins, and completing them earned various bonuses. Perhaps in order to gain more skills, Hinata would need to upgrade his suit once more. However, he didn't yet fully understand exactly how to do that. Perhaps some kind of trigger was needed for this. After all, when he was learning the revenge skill, he was given a list of upgrades, even though it wasn't available yet. Perhaps that's how suit upgrades are displayed. Maybe it happened when Hinata first absorbed the magic crystal, but the description was different back then. At that time, it mentioned the suit's owner's incredible willpower. Hinata still had a lot to think about, but the next day he went to the hospital to visit his sister and mother. Hinata's younger sister, Hikari, had also been injured during the monster attack and was undergoing rehabilitation. According to Hikari, she was already feeling much better and would soon be discharged from the hospital. Outwardly, it really did seem like she was fine, and that made Hinata happy. However, the same could not be said for their mother, who had suffered the most. For more than 10 years, she had remained unconscious due to crystalline disease. The disease is caused by the poison of a certain monster, and the saddest part is that there is still no antidote. Hikari had also been infected with the crystalline poison, but thanks to her mother, she had received only a small dose. So, unlike her mother, she was on the mend. If all goes well, she'll be discharged as early as next year. But aside from that, there was another serious problem. A man named Kagura Ginji. He led the Phoenix Guild, which fought monsters. Hikari didn't know who he really was, so she treated him kindly. At first glance, you wouldn't have thought he was a villain or anything like that. Not only did he always smile, but he also brought young Hikari all sorts of gifts. However, Hinata knew perfectly well what kind of person he really was, but he didn't want to tell Hikari about it. Ginji asked him to step out for a moment to discuss their previous conversation. He began by saying that supporting a younger sister who wouldn't recover anytime soon and caring for a sick mother was a heavy burden that required a lot of money. That's why he offered his help. After all, Hinata's father had once been a member of his guild as well, but Ginji was only pretending to be a good guy. In reality, he was a real scoundrel. The fact is that crystals obtained from patients with serious illnesses possess the same properties as magic crystals. Magic crystals are sources of new energy, and they can be extracted from the human body. That's why patients with crystal disease are sold at a high price under the pretext of research. Ginji had just wanted to take his mother's body, ostensibly to treat her illness, but in reality, that wasn't the case. That's why Hinata refused. However, even after that, Ginji didn't back down and kept talking about money, reminding him that almost nothing was left of his father's savings, and the hospital bills still had to be paid. Hinata understood this perfectly well himself, without needing to be reminded. Ginji pointed out that Hinata's artifact was of the lowest rank, and it was unlikely that it would earn enough to support the entire family. Despite this, Hinata didn't back down from his decision and firmly declared that he would protect his family no matter what, because that was his father's last wish, and he would do everything to ensure his father wouldn't be disappointed in him. Hinata asked him not to tell Hikari about their conversation, and Ginji didn't object. He didn't want her to hate him too. Ginji admitted defeat and left, but before he went, he told Hinata that if he changed his mind, he could always come to him. Back in the ward, Hikari asked curiously what they had talked about, but Hinata simply replied that it was a secret. He understood that in order to protect his family and keep his promise, he needed to join the guild and earn a lot of money. Hinata needed to become stronger, much stronger. And, as always, the school portal to the monster realm, which would soon open again, would help him with that. He couldn't waste a single minute, but on his way to school, he heard strange screams. They were coming from around the corner and seemed to belong to one of his classmates, but Hinata decided to ignore it. It really was a girl from his school, Akane Yamura, but he walked right past her. Hinata decided it wasn't his problem and that he shouldn't get involved. Meanwhile, the guys continued to harass the girl, ignoring her pleas to leave her alone. The guys were somewhat like Kurimura. They were bullies too, but they were offering her money in exchange for sex. Akane kept resisting, saying it was some kind of misunderstanding and that they were confusing her with someone else. But one of the guys said he knew her secret. After that, they began threatening that if she didn't agree to go with them, the whole school would find out about her so-called secrets. They kept assuring her that nothing would happen to her and that they would even pay her for it, but Akane refused. In response to their audacity, she snapped back and spat right in the bully's face. She told him to get lost, along with his offers. This turn of events surprised the guys and angered them even more. One of them grabbed her and started saying that no one actually needed her, that even her own family had sold her out. But Akane dismissed his words, declaring that she still had her dignity. When the bully tried to grab her again, Hinata suddenly grabbed his arm. It seems he couldn't just walk away from the situation after all, and decided to help Akane. The guy didn't recognize Hinata right away and asked if they happened to go to the same school, but the girls who were with them immediately replied that this was indeed Hinata, the weakling from Class E with the worst artifact. Hearing this, the guy remembered him too, recalling how he'd made a fool of himself on live TV. The guys told Hinata to slip away quietly since they had business with Akane, and it would be best for him not to get involved. But Hinata replied that he wouldn't do that. This angered the guy even more, and he lunged at Hinata with his fists. Akane didn't understand why Hinata had intervened, since these guys were from Class C, and he was unlikely to be able to stand up to them. However, Hinata thought otherwise and managed to strike the bully first. He easily knocked him to the ground and delivered a hard elbow strike to his back. Akane was amazed. It turned out Hinata was actually much stronger than he seemed. She never would have thought he was hiding something. His resilience and hidden potential surprised more than just her. Even Shizuku, who surpassed him in every way, trained all her free time. Unlike Hinata, she was much faster and stronger, but she lacked what he had. Even though everyone, even the teachers, recognized her skills. Teacher Takashi praised her for her diligence and how quickly she picked up taijutsu. However, Shizuku said she still wasn't strong enough because there was someone stronger. Takashi was surprised to hear this and asked again, "Is there really someone stronger at her age?" Shizuku confirmed it confidently. She added that because she'd chosen the wrong path, taijutsu had become her only option. Akane couldn't stop being surprised. After all, she had considered Hinata a weakling, incapable of even handling Kurimura, and now he was effortlessly dispatching the guys from Class C. It seemed as though this kind of fight was a walk in the park for him. One of the guys tried to sneak up from behind. He even managed to grab Hinata, but Hinata easily shook him off. Then, with a powerful blow, he knocked his opponent down as if it were nothing. Hinata managed to defeat all the bullies from Class C without sustaining any serious injuries. This stunned Akane. She had thought he was just a regular wimp, but it turned out to be the opposite. He defeated them even without an artifact. Akane began to wonder, could he really be that strong? One of the guys tried to get up, but Hinata had been expecting this. However, it was a diversion so that another guy could retrieve the artifact despite the ban. The guy fired directly at Hinata, but at the last second, Hinata managed to react and block the shot with his hands. However, the blow was so powerful that it sent him flying a couple of meters. Hinata was surprised. He didn't feel any pain. Perhaps his opponent was weaker than expected. Passers-by reacted to the shot, already preparing to call the police for the use of the artifact. The guys realized the situation was getting out of hand and decided to flee, promising that this wasn't the end. Hinata was still processing what had happened. Akane approached him with concern, asking if he was all right, but he replied that he was fine and there was nothing to worry about. She was surprised. Could he really be unharmed after such a blow? Hinata said he was leaving, but Akane stopped him, asking why he wasn't curious to know if she was involved in what had happened. He didn't quite understand what she meant, so he asked if she wanted him to listen to her. Akane replied that no, she just wanted him to give her a little of his time. Hinata said it was fine and that he wasn't interested, but Akane pressed him. Then why did he save her if she hadn't supported him before? The young man didn't know what to say. So he nodded toward the bouquet in her hands, saying she should hurry, she was probably rushing to meet someone. He turned around and walked away. This surprised Akane even more. Before, when he was being beaten up, he hadn't even tried to fight back. She'd thought he was pathetic, but it seemed she'd been very wrong. Akane was actually glad she'd been wrong. After all, he turned out to be a good person. Back at school, Hinata kept thinking about what had happened and pondering how to become stronger. Suddenly, Akane approached him to say hello. He was surprised that she had decided to talk to him. Akane admitted that she'd forgotten to thank him for his help yesterday and wanted to do so now. Hinata replied that it was fine. Just then, Akane's friends started asking what had happened. Hinata had hoped to walk quietly into the classroom, but that wasn't to be. Suddenly, someone shot him in the head with the same artifact as yesterday. Strangely enough, it turned out to be the same guys. Hinata thought they had come for Akane again. Akane's friend, Kaoru Minamura, was surprised and asked her why the guys were so angry at Hinata. Akane thought they had come for her again, but the guys declared that they no longer needed her. Now their target was Hinata. They had come to get revenge on him for what happened yesterday, since it was his fault they hadn't been able to have fun their own way. But Hinata looked calm and merely remarked that they were picking on the students from Class E again. This infuriated the boy even more, and he wanted to settle the score with him once and for all. Hinata wanted to say something back, but this time the artifacts were used by several guys at once. Facing off against two guys with artifacts like that was a serious problem for Hinata, who had the weakest artifact of all possible ones. So they could easily take him down right there on school grounds. One of the bullies told Hinata to hate his past self, because now they were going to torment him all the way until graduation. But suddenly, a projectile resembling an artifact shell flew at him from somewhere. Akane didn't stand idly by and decided to intervene. Hinata had saved her last time. Now it was her turn to help. This made the bully even angrier, and he said she had surprised him. However, their artifacts were very different, and the gap between them was enormous. To demonstrate this, he fired directly at Hinata. Akane tried to stop him, but the boys didn't care. Just then, Kurimura approached the classroom and was greatly surprised to see what was happening. Hinata noticed something strange. Despite the severe damage, he felt almost no pain. Could this really be my own abilities, and not those of the artifact? He thought. If the system was indeed displaying his own stats, and not those of the suit, then that meant he could become even stronger. The guy who had shot Hinata was very surprised when Hinata got back up, thinking he'd simply failed to finish him off. Hinata, however, decided to retaliate using his special skill, revenge. He was determined to prove to them that he wasn't a weakling, but a capable hero. With a powerful attack, he struck one of the guys, but the guy managed to block the blow with an artifact. However, the artifact didn't save him. The blow was so strong that the guy was literally slammed into the wall. The other students were shocked. How could a weakling like Hinata have managed to do that? After all, his artifact was only supposed to deflect attacks, not amplify them. On top of that, the bully didn't understand why Hinata was smirking at his artifact. Although that guy wasn't seriously hurt, he admitted that it all happened too suddenly, and he didn't have time to react. Another guy with a gun-shaped artifact decided that the reason Hinata was so resilient was that he'd missed his solar plexus. Hinata, meanwhile, wondered why his strike hadn't been as powerful as expected. Apparently, he had absorbed some of the damage. Now he was truly in trouble. He'd already played his trump card, but he had no intention of giving up. Their fight was suddenly interrupted by the teacher, who ordered them to stop such behavior first thing in the morning. All the kids, except for the bullies, breathed a sigh of relief. However, Kaoru looked dissatisfied for some reason. Kurimura was surprised, remarking that even a weakling could be so stubborn. He warned him that he'd better be careful not to get hurt. But Shu objected, saying he was wrong. The giant hand wasn't the kind of artifact that could be easily defeated. The Class C opponents weren't particularly injured, but Hinata was no longer the person they had once thought him to be. The young man had previously thought that his artifact was meant to enhance his suit, but it turned out to be something else entirely. In fact, the artifact actually makes him stronger. This means that his skills in the system work even without the suit. Hinata wondered why this was the case, but he continued to wear the suit anyway. It could still come in handy in the event of a sudden attack. The problem was that his artifact was still too weak. And yet, he didn't understand how he could improve it. His thoughts were interrupted by Kurimura, who walked up to him. Kurimura said he just wanted to praise him for his performance today. Of course, that was a lie, meant to lull him into a false sense of security before striking. In Kurimura's eyes, Hinata was still the same weakling who brought him food. But still, changes had already begun. Kurimura's blows weren't as painful anymore. Hinata wanted to respond, but he couldn't use revenge today, so he decided to endure it for now. At that moment, Akane interrupted the conversation, saying she'd come to talk to Hinata. Kurimura was surprised by her appearance, noting that she had defended him that morning as well. He said he didn't believe she would defend a scumbag like Hinata, but Akane retorted that all he knew how to do was imitate others. Or maybe she was wrong, and there was another motive hidden here. Maybe he bullies the weak just to impress girls, calling it a cheap trick. Kurimura didn't answer. He just turned around and walked away. Akane told Hinata that she couldn't help him anymore, so he'd better figure it out on his own. But he just asked why she was helping him in the first place. She admitted that she felt guilty because the boys from Class C were now picking on him, and she decided to apologize by doing this. Hinata replied that it was okay, and she shouldn't worry. After all, he'd gotten himself into this mess. In response, Akane shared a short story from her past with him. She told him that her father had fought on the front lines against monsters from another world. However, when she was still a little girl, he was attacked by a horde of monsters, and he hasn't woken up since. As a result, her family began to face financial difficulties, and to support them, her mother started selling her body. Because of this, her mother became stranger by the day, bringing new men home every day. She got so used to it that, before Akane graduated from high school, she forced her to do the same. Akane is, of course, grateful to her mother for raising her, but after all that, she ran away to this school because she hates her with all her heart. She said she wanted to become a soldier and fight on the front lines to earn a lot of money, but she ended up in Class E, and if things continue this way, her future is doomed. Akane didn't understand how those guys found out about it, but yesterday they wanted exactly that from her, in exchange for money. Despite that, Hinata asked her why she decided to share this with him. Akane replied that he too had gotten dragged into her problems, and she didn't like being in his debt, even though he wasn't about to listen to her. She also noted that she hadn't seen the guys from Class C during lunch break, which was strange. She asked Hinata to be careful, since they might be lying in wait for him after class, to which he replied in kind. As she left, Akane told Hinata that from now on, he should address her as Yamura, instead of using the informal you. Kurimura was still angry about Akane's appearance. After all, because of her, he hadn't been able to beat up Hinata. So he decided he'd have to teach Hinata a double lesson for that. Kurimura suggested luring him to a quiet place where no one would interrupt them. But then Shu noticed something strange. Through the window, he saw Kaoru talking with those same guys from Class C. It seemed strange, since Kaoru and Akane are friends, and those guys had recently been harassing her. He decided to get to the bottom of it and move closer, telling Kurimura that he'd go back to the cafeteria to get his wallet. As he got closer, he began eavesdropping on their conversation. It seemed Kaoru was angry that they had been picking on Akane, and if that was the case, she was in danger, he thought. However, he had no idea that Kaoru herself had planned the whole thing from the start, and that she had come to talk to them specifically about that. The guys said there was no point in reporting back, since their senior had already scolded them. They said they'd been caught yesterday while carrying out the mission, and on top of that, Akane had put up a strong fight. Kaoru was surprised to hear this, since she was sure Akane wouldn't put up a fight. One of the guys asked her again, wasn't she the one who told them that Akane had run away to this school? Shu was even more surprised. They continued to argue that, in a situation like that, Akane should have just sold her body without a fuss. If that were the case, Kaoru really was a disgusting friend. But Kaoru denied it, saying that, on the contrary, she was kindly providing her with clients. She claimed that the school was full of troubled students, so she was helping them, and she was sure Akane would be grateful to her. In reality, though, Kaoru was simply using her artifact for her own purposes. Her artifact is capable of controlling a person's mind, essentially hypnotizing them. The boy still asked her not to use the artifact on them, and wondered why, with such a powerful artifact, she was in Class E. The answer was simple. Even though the artifact is incredible, it's useless against monsters. You need combat strength, and there are also monsters that her abilities don't work on. So the guys decided to try again, promising they wouldn't screw up this time. Kaoru noted that she didn't know how the senior would react to their failure, but he would definitely ruin their lives. They agreed that tomorrow they would try again to lure Akane to his place, this time using Kaoru's artifact. Shu realized he'd just overheard an extremely dangerous conversation and didn't know what to do next. He was certain he wouldn't be able to stop the guys from Class C, and if the senior got involved too, Kurimura, of course, won't be able to help either. After all, he can't defeat them himself, and he'd hardly agree to do so anyway. But maybe he'll be able to ask Hinata for help, and perhaps he'll be able to help Akane. Akane's father was a true hero, and she had always believed that and been proud of him. Even though she often told him this, her father constantly dismissed her words. He said that a hero is someone who fights without sparing himself. But he was different. He said that if you can protect even yourself, that's already good enough. After all, a person who stands firm in their convictions is strong, and he advised Akane to remember that. But one day, those warm days with her father came to an end when he was attacked by monsters. He was in critical condition. The doctor saved his life, but his illness turned out to be severe. Akane continued to believe that one day everything would change and her father would wake up, but her mother didn't share that faith. From that day on, she changed completely. Akane asked her not to smoke in her father's hospital room, but she didn't care. Her mother hated him for what had happened, accusing him of doing it on purpose, even though he had promised to protect them. Akane begged her to stop talking that way, but all she heard in response was, "Am I not right? After all, the hospital bills are too expensive." Her mother also declared that after high school, Akane would have to work just like she did. But Akane didn't want that. But there was one way to cure her father. In another world, there lives a basilisk, and its liver has healing properties. Rumor has it that it can cure any illness. Unfortunately, basilisks are extremely rare, but Akane believed that one day she would be able to obtain one. That's when she decided to enroll in Valkyrie Academy to become a warrior, just like her father. But at school, everything turned out to be completely different from what she had imagined. After enrolling and ending up in Class E, Akane almost gave up on her goal, thinking it was all over for her. She was afraid to fight, believing she might get hurt. However, with Hinata's arrival in her life, everything changed. He became her role model. Kaoru was already waiting for Akane outside the classroom, and she couldn't even imagine what her friend had planned. Kaoru used her artifact to hypnotize Akane and lead her to the senior. Meanwhile, Shu continued to follow Hinata, intending to tell him what had happened, but was afraid to do so. He was surprised when Hinata noticed him first and asked what he wanted. Hinata said that Shu usually hung out with Kurimura and asked why he was following him now. Shu wanted to tell him about Kaoru and Akane, but couldn't get a word out. Hinata had always teased him, so he was too embarrassed to ask for help. Hinata decided not to wait for an answer and said he was leaving since Shu didn't need anything. Even after that, Shu still couldn't bring himself to say anything. Meanwhile, Kaoru was already leading Akane straight to the senior, and Akane's gaze was distant. Shu kept telling himself until the very last moment that this had nothing to do with him. But he finally gave in and ran after them. Meanwhile, the senior was eagerly awaiting Kaoru and asking the other guys if everything was still on track. They assured him that this time, everything would go smoothly, unlike last time. After all, Kaoru herself would be bringing Akane, so there was no reason to worry. The leader decided to believe them, since he needed Akane to make a little money. And just then, Kaoru arrived, accompanied by Akane, who considered her closest friend. The boss was glad she had finally arrived, and Kaoru apologized for the slight delay. He asked if she'd been allowed to use her artifact, to which she replied that she hadn't, but there was no other way. It was the best way to bring her here. Akane really was cute, a fact that one of the girls standing next to the senior noticed. She remarked that the senior had wanted her to be his girlfriend, but he replied that he didn't anymore. After all, she was still just a child. However, he decided to use her for his dirty business anyway. Akane was under Kaoru's hypnosis, so she couldn't resist and could only respond as her friend ordered. So she said she agreed, because she needed money for her father's treatment. The older guy highly praised Kaoru's artifact, calling it amazing, but there was one catch. He noticed that someone else had come with them, a little rat. And it seemed Kaoru had brought a tail along. Shu began to panic, not understanding why he'd come here in the first place, since he couldn't handle them on his own. He decided to try to escape, but as soon as he emerged from his hiding spot, Kaoru immediately used her artifact and hypnotized him. Shu was weak, so he couldn't resist and submitted to her artifact. The senior asked who this guy was and whether he would cause any trouble. Kaoru replied that everything was fine. He was her classmate, Hagane, so there wouldn't be any problems. Since Shu was now under her control, Kaoru ordered him to undress Akane. One of the guys, part of the very same trio that had attacked her earlier, said he would film it. Shu, under their control, couldn't do anything and didn't understand why he always acted this way. Why was he so two-faced? Even though he had a sense of justice, he still ended up on the side of the bad guys. It annoyed him, but as he thought, there was nothing he could do about it. He knew the reason. It was easier that way. Not to resist, and then to apologize and say he had no choice. But Hinata, he's not like that. He's different. And at that moment, Hinata himself appeared. With a powerful blow, he knocked Shu unconscious and managed to save Akane. Kaoru thought she could subdue Hinata just as she had Akane and Shu. But for some reason, her artifact didn't work on Hinata, no matter how hard she tried. The senior asked her who he was, and Kaoru replied that he was another classmate of hers. And although at first glance he seemed like an ordinary weakling, that wasn't the case at all. Kaoru tried to use the artifact against him, but it had no effect on Hinata, and he asked her why she was doing all this, since she and Akane were friends. Besides, she most likely knew about her family problems and how she ended up at the academy. But Kaoru replied that that was exactly why she had helped her by offering her the so-called job. Shu, who had been affected by her artifact, shouted at Hinata to be wary of her, since she wasn't at all who she claimed to be. The girl didn't give up, thinking that the longer she used the artifact, the faster she'd be able to subdue the guy. At that moment, Shu asked Hinata why he had come there, since Hinata hadn't told him anything. Hinata replied that he figured it out from his behavior, and that he understood. Shu was following someone else's orders, even though he didn't want to. And his words touched Shu, who felt even more ashamed of his behavior. Also present were the very same guys who had attacked Hinata before, and they were certain that today he wouldn't be able to escape like he had before. One of the guys, who was carrying a cannon-shaped artifact, suddenly fired a shot right at Hinata, but he couldn't pull off such a cheap trick on him anymore, like he used to. The guy was surprised when Hinata managed to block the attack, assuming he'd just gotten lucky. But the older guy objected, saying it was impossible to pull something like that off by accident. He asked Kaoru what kind of artifact Hinata had, to which she replied that he had no abilities at all. The elder didn't believe it, since artifacts without abilities don't exist, and he was certain that Hinata was hiding something. Despite all this, Kaoru continued to try to use the artifact against him. She was certain it had to work, since even the strongest people couldn't resist it. Hinata, however, was aided by his own artifact, which granted him resistance to mental attacks, so the girl's artifact had no effect on him. Suddenly, another guy with a gigantic hand attacked him, but at the last moment, Hinata managed to dodge it. Hinata was angry and didn't understand why they were doing all this, or what the point of it was. After all, artifacts aren't meant to be used to harm others. Their power is supposed to protect people from monsters. But his impassioned speech only made the guys laugh, since they thought entirely differently. At the same time, this annoyed the older guy, and he asked Hinata if he really didn't understand the rules of this world at all. In his opinion, only a few people can gain the government's approval and join a guild, while the rest can't even feed themselves. And striving for these artifacts was, in his view, a waste of time, since it wouldn't bring him any closer to wealth. But Hinata didn't share his opinion, and didn't want to live just to get rich. He asked, "Do we really have to hunt down people who are honestly doing their best just for money?" And the elder replied confidently that yes, he wasn't interested in anyone else, and he found it strange that Hinata hadn't figured this out yet. After all, if he looks around, he'll see that everyone is out for their own gain. Take Kaoru, for example, who sold out her friend for money. And no matter what anyone thinks, this will be the right decision, because the main goal in this world is survival. That's why there's no guarantee they'll be able to join the guild, and only losers try their hardest. That's what the elder believed. Hinata, however, disagreed with him, got even angrier, and attacked him in response to his loud speech. But his attack was blocked by a guy with a gigantic arm, making Hinata's path more difficult. The elder said he was disappointed in him, since he thought Hinata would be a worthy opponent, but he turned out to be just an ordinary weakling. Hinata grew even angrier, because for him, the artifact was a way to protect himself and his loved ones, while for them, it was just a game and an opportunity to mock the weak. So he decided not to give up, and to prove through his perseverance that they were wrong. The older one was just like Genji, ready to torment as many weak people as he wanted for his own amusement, and many others were in the same situation as he and Akane, only others took advantage of them because they were weak. Hinata's suit reacted to the rage boiling inside him and triggered a forced update. Thanks to this, he managed to break through the giant hand's defenses. He upgraded the artifact and activated the Suit of Rage, which transformed his fury into immense power. Hinata told the elder and the others that he would fight until people like them disappeared forever. The elder was surprised at how quickly the young man's power was changing, and wanted to ask Kaoru about it, but her expression spoke for itself. No one had known until that moment just how powerful this boy really was. And when the elder let his guard down, Hinata decided to attack him. At the last moment, the elder managed to dodge, and the blow only grazed his face. However, the aura emanating from Hinata and his suit was slightly intimidating. But the senior had no intention of standing there and taking a beating, so he decided to use his artifact. He also noted that even though he had dropped out of school, he used to be in Class B, so the difference in strength between them was enormous, and Hinata had only himself to blame for coming here. He attacked Hinata with his artifact, but Hinata managed to block his blows. This surprised his opponent, since he couldn't understand how a guy from Class E could possess any significant strength. However, after changing his uniform, Hinata began to move better than before. And how could that even be possible? But the senior kept harping on the difference in their strength, adding that he had far more experience. And so it was. Hinata hadn't expected that, even after parrying his attacks, his opponent would still be able to use them to strike again. And with the help of water, he tightly bound him. The senior considered this his victory, telling his opponent that he should have been just a little more careful. After that, he began attacking Hinata relentlessly, while Hinata couldn't even break free from the trap. Despite Hinata's abilities, his opponent's attacks turned out to be more painful than he'd expected. The Elder decided to reveal a special feature of his artifact, noting that he could freely manipulate it by channeling water through it. That's why he was such a formidable opponent for Hinata. Just as he was about to attack again, this time with an even more powerful strike, someone suddenly deflected his blow. It turned out to be Akane, whom Shu had managed to free from Kaoru's hypnosis. Seeing this, Kaoru tried once more to use the artifact against her friend. However, this time she failed, and Akane managed to react first and knock the artifact out of her hands. Akane asked her why she had done that, since she thought they were good friends, and Kaoru replied that it was what Akane wanted herself, to make money. But that was a lie, and Akane couldn't believe that Kaoru really thought that about her. Kaoru was surprised too, since she was sure Akane would follow in her mother's footsteps and should be grateful to her. For Kaoru, it was all just a joke, but it completely infuriated Akane. Just as she was about to attack Kaoru again, she was suddenly struck in the back. It was the same guy who had a gun similar to Akane's artifact, but more powerful. Hinata was tied up, Akane was exhausted, and Shu didn't have the courage to save them. The Elder declared that it was all over for Hinata, but that he would later tell him what this world was really like. However, Akane found the strength to get up and told Hinata that she was angry, but there was nothing she could do for now. She promised to do her very best and to definitely prove that she had grown stronger. After saying this, Akane shot the Elder to lower his guard and free Hinata from the trap. It worked, and Hinata was able to successfully escape the trap. But Akane was no longer able to do anything else and asked Hinata to finish what she had started. Seeing the girl's determination, Hinata too refused to back down and resolved to save her at all costs. For a former Class B student, reusing the artifact was no trouble at all. But now it was no longer an obstacle for Hinata either, since his trump card was the revenge skill. This turn of events surprised the senior, and he couldn't understand how the boy was getting stronger with each passing day. Hinata changed his tone and told him that they shouldn't be bullied, even if they were from Class E. He stepped closer and began attacking the senior, who was so taken aback that he was at a loss for words and frantically tried to respond. Hinata kept attacking and cornering him, saying that since they were weaklings from Class E, why couldn't he defeat them? As he retreated, the older boy slipped on his own water bottle and fell. So he cornered himself and gave Hinata a perfect chance to deliver the finishing blow. None of the bullies could have even imagined that things would turn out this way, and that their leader would be defeated. They couldn't believe he'd been defeated, and in desperation tried to attack Hinata. But such attacks wouldn't faze him. After all, this wasn't the first time he'd faced something like this. Hinata easily counterattacked and grabbed the leader by the collar, telling him it would be best not to come near them. After all, he didn't have any time to waste on people like them. The aura emanating from Hinata was truly monstrous. He was a completely different person now. Looking at him, Akane recalled her father's words, that a person who believes in a single goal is stronger than anyone else. They could be congratulated on the successful resolution of this unpleasant incident, since they'd all done a splendid job. But the incident didn't go unnoticed. Someone from the school had filmed the whole thing and sent the footage to the principal. What they saw turned out to be quite unexpected. The principal noted that the school has no use for those who go too far, and that they would have to be dealt with. He figured out who was tarnishing the school's reputation, but in the process, he discovered something interesting. It looked like the next exam would be much more interesting, and he was already looking forward to it. The next day, all 4 students involved in the incident with Akane were expelled from school with no right to return. Akane and Hinata hadn't expected this outcome, assuming the boys would simply be disciplined. However, the girl noted that all of them had a bad reputation, except for Kaoru. And just then, Kurimura and Shu walked by. Kurimura didn't care who had been expelled, so he headed to the cafeteria, while Shu never worked up the courage to speak to the boys. Even though he had something to say, he was too scared to do so. Hinata remarked that he wished Shu could interact with them normally, but Akane replied that some things never change. After all, when she thanked him the day before, he'd just replied that he hadn't done anything and quickly walked away. Hinata was surprised by his behavior, but instead of dwelling on it, he decided to head to the cafeteria. Akane decided to go with him, and Hinata asked why, since she had her bento with her. She replied that it would be cool to have lunch together. Hinata didn't object, so they had lunch in the academy's park. He told her that his artifact had gained additional abilities, which greatly surprised Akane. For some reason, Hinata thought she had those same capabilities too. She asked if he'd had similar options before, but they'd been too weak to use, and Hinata confirmed this. Yesterday, he had been so angry that he hadn't even had time to check the system for updates. He upgraded the artifact, and the system reported a new improvement. His attack power had increased, and the rage suit was now amplifying it, just as needed. Thanks to his emotions, the suit had changed, and although Hinata didn't know the requirements for the next upgrade, everything was pointing toward him becoming even stronger. That's why he needs to keep growing and become stronger than he is now. Akane also wanted to undergo special training. Although she couldn't upgrade her artifact like Hinata could, she still wanted to become stronger. That's exactly why she promised to do her very best. And Hinata said he knew that. He added that as long as she used her artifact, her physical abilities would grow along with her strength and skill level. The fact that she got away with only a minor injury after that blow confirms this. It also proves that she's been working hard on herself. Akane was flustered by his words, and she admitted that she still wasn't strong enough. But as she had promised, she would show what she was truly capable of. And she thanked him for yesterday. Hinata replied that that would be the case, and that together they would become stronger. Someone was secretly watching their conversation from the academy. Shizuku was watching them and chuckled, saying that the weaklings looked pretty good together. She asked Sachi if she felt the same way, but Sachi disagreed. Shizuku then suggested that Sachi join their group, hinting that it might come in handy for the retake exam. But Sachi refused and said she would hold off on making a decision for now. Shizuku wasn't thrilled with that answer, but she said that if Sachi changed her mind, she should let her know. After all, there was still time. Sachi didn't trust the people around Shizuku. There were bad rumors about them, and they might have been involved in the expulsion of some students. She was certain that, at first glance, they seemed like ordinary kids, but in reality, things were different. She was most interested in Akane and Hinata, since they weren't like the others. Seeing how they overcame difficulties together, Sachi wanted to join them, but in Shizuku, she saw a threat, and at times, even extraordinary cruelty. Training in the portal was important, but she couldn't afford to skip school either. Class E's homeroom teacher was Takashima Gonzo, who explained to the students that while there were many ways to improve artifacts, physical development was the key to progress. And although they were outmatched by the other students in terms of strength, they still had a chance. They had to prove that their place in this class was a complete mistake. Seeing Hinata grow stronger, Kurimura began to worry. The teacher announced that a retest would be held soon, and if they didn't improve their grades, they would remain in Class E forever. But even in that case, they couldn't give up, because the artifact's level wasn't everything. The grade depended not only on the artifact, but also on physical abilities and intellect. What's more, this year's exam would involve teamwork. However, upon hearing this, the other students weren't particularly thrilled, and Shu asked how the teams would be assigned. The teacher replied that teams could consist of 2 to 5 people, and students could choose their teammates on their own, regardless of class. Then Kurimura asked if this was a joke, because who would want to take a student from Class E onto their team? Teacher Gonzo pointed out that this was a challenge that would allow them to meet new people, since the school's mission was to send excellent warriors to the guild to serve the country, and they shouldn't forget that in the guild, they would have to cooperate with others. He added that even though Class E was the lowest ranked, they still needed to try to move up from it, but Kurimura thought that was impossible. He blames none other than Hinata for this, because if Hinata had given up during that exam, everything would have turned out differently. After class, Akane asked Hinata what they were going to do, but he didn't quite understand what she meant. Akane explained that they needed to find members for their group for the duration of the exam. Kurimura interrupted their conversation, stating that it was unlikely anyone would want to team up with a weakling like Hinata. Akane asked him what he even wanted, since he'd come all the way here, but he replied that he didn't want anything. In response, he grabbed Hinata and declared that since he was feeling better, he should run out and buy him some food. Hinata was about to reply, but Akane stepped in and told Kurimura to go get the food himself. Her words infuriated Kurimura, and he asked her what she meant. He pointed out that they often spend time together, and asked if she was really planning to team up with him now that Kaoru had been expelled. Akane replied that Hinata was much better than him, and that Kurimura wasn't cut out for teamwork. He asked what she was talking about, but Akane pointed at Shu and asked if he felt the same way. Kurimura grabbed Shu and began questioning him, asking if he really agreed with Akane, but Shu replied that wasn't the case. He had no reason to think so, and besides, he'd like to team up with him. Watching this, Hinata and Akane wanted to intervene, but realized it was pointless. After that, Kurimura began to have doubts about Shu. Akane suggested they discuss how to retake the exam, but without them, since they didn't have time to worry about others. On the way, Akane talked about Shu and how it was pointless to get involved in his and Kurimura's affairs just to save him. However, she hopes that someday he'll change his mind, and Hinata asked if everything would be okay if she teamed up with him. She replied that it was her own decision, so there was no need to worry, since Hinata was strong and should be confident in himself. Many still considered him the weakest student, so he needed to prove them wrong on this exam. Sachi happened to be walking by and wondered what they were talking about. She noticed that the atmosphere around Hinata had changed compared to what she'd seen before. It seems he really will be able to prove himself and surprise everyone. Meanwhile, Kurimura flew into a rage after hearing Akane's words. He asked Shu if there had ever been any serious injuries or fatalities during the retake exams. Shu replied that, unfortunately, such incidents had occurred in the past. This year, the retest will be held on Class D's grounds, under realistic combat conditions. So, incidents with serious consequences are possible. Kurimura, however, decided to create the conditions for one such accidental incident. Meanwhile, the upcoming retest was the subject of heated discussion online. Most people were betting on Shizuku and Sachi to win, since they were considered the favorites. Hinata, on the other hand, was seen as the underdog, and no one believed he could win. But this didn't demotivate him in the least, and he continued to train to perform better than he had on the previous exam. In the past, a sudden attack from a monster from behind would have caught him off guard, and he might have died. Now, however, he effortlessly parried such attacks and easily counterattacked his opponents. Since his first exam, Hinata had improved significantly, not only in strength, but also in other areas. However, there was something that kept troubling him, because he still didn't fully understand all the features of his suit. The suit of rage was far sturdier than before, but it drained his strength more quickly, and Hinata could feel his energy slipping away. On top of that, when his energy ran out, the suit imposed penalties and drained his health every second. That's why he needed to become even stronger to use the new suit without restrictions, since the Indomitable suit would be his primary one for some time. Akane was getting stronger alongside him too, since they'd started training together after the recent events. Akane arrived a little later than planned and apologized for the delay, explaining that she had been attending extra classes. Even though Valkyrie Academy was considered primarily a military school, academic studies were still mandatory. Akane asked why Hinata wasn't taking the extra classes, since they might be useful to him as well. She wasn't too happy that he'd decided not to take them. Hinata had once studied supplementary material with Shizuku, but she had said that the regular curriculum wasn't enough. He didn't want to tell Akane about this, so he said he was studying everything on his own in the evenings, and she was surprised by his dedication. However, there was no time for conversation now. It was time to train so they wouldn't fail the exam. There was very little time left before it began, so they needed to get stronger in that short time. Sachi was secretly watching them, trying to hide her presence, but Hinata managed to spot her. She suddenly attacked them, thinking they wouldn't expect it, but at the last moment, Hinata grabbed Akane and dodged the blow. Akane didn't even have time to realize who it was and was terribly frightened. Sachi emerged from behind a tree and praised Hinata, noting that he had changed noticeably. Before, he wouldn't even have been able to notice her attack, but now he managed to dodge it. Hinata was seeing her for the first time, so he asked who she was, which greatly surprised Sachi. Akane replied that she knew her. The girl's name was Sachi Shirahane. She was in Class A, and rumor had it she was just as strong as Shizuku. Sachi thought Hinata would recognize her, so when he asked who she was, she felt a little down. In response to Akane's words, she said that Shizuku had been acting strangely lately, and she believed Hinata was the reason. That's why she came here, to test him and see what he's capable of. Hinata dodged her attack and grabbed the weapon, letting an electric pulse pass through him, since he couldn't use an artifact of that level. But Sachi was no slouch either, and managed to dodge his counterattack. Her artifact allowed her not only to fight at close range, but also to unleash a powerful surge of energy from a distance. Hinata dodged, but Sachi outmatched him in agility and combat skills. Despite this, the boy didn't give up and continued to fend off her attacks. However, the gap between them was enormous, and Sachi was clearly no match for him. She noted that he was already on a different level, and if he hadn't been hiding his abilities, he could have become even stronger. Hinata asked her what her goal was and why she had appeared so suddenly. She replied that all the participants in the upcoming exam want to team up with her, but she, on the contrary, is looking for an interesting person. That's why she wants to team up with Hinata, since he's the perfect fit for the role. But Hinata didn't hesitate and immediately refused. Sachi asked again, thinking she might have misheard him, but his answer didn't change. The girl got angry and didn't understand why he was refusing, while Hinata asked if she really thought it was possible to team up after a sudden attack. Besides, he's certain she shouldn't seek recognition solely through force, since that would make it too easy for her to get into the top class. But then people would hate him even more, and no one would believe that he'd achieved everything on his own. He was, of course, grateful to her, but he had no choice but to refuse. After all, his goal is to join the guild, and to do that, he needs to earn recognition through his own efforts. Sachi didn't try to change his mind, and as she left, she said that he was interesting and that she was looking forward to seeing him move up to the next class. Akane, on the other hand, didn't understand why Hinata had let such an opportunity slip away. Hinata reminded her that he'd already said everything there was to say, and added that Sachi hadn't even glanced at Akane. She was only concerned with her own interests. It seemed like Akane was starting to understand him, and Hinata added that Sachi wasn't the type to work as part of a team. And to get a good grade, the whole group needs to put in the effort. Otherwise, she'll have less of a chance of getting a high rating. Hinata's words cheered her up, and she was happy to have found such a friend. Hinata continued to reflect on what had happened, since Sachi is one of the strongest students in Class A, and by every measure, he was inferior to her. She was still holding back, but even in his anger suit, he didn't stand a chance. He felt a rush of excitement and decided to test the suit's new upgrades, since in his current situation, he couldn't make up for lost time. But the list of improvements had grown longer. In addition, a new reward called Audience had unlocked, the significance of which he didn't yet understand. Meanwhile, the task force fighting monsters from another world was discussing the situation. They regularly convened guild meetings to deliberate on important decisions. The Minister of Defense was Gan Lin Ping, who asked about the progress of the investigation into the appearance of the new portal. Present at the meeting was the head of the Phoenix Guild, Kagura Ginji. Also present was Sherry Truman, the Guildmaster of Deldoris, and the valiant Guildmaster of the Victory Guild, Shio Mizui. All three held an S-Rank. Ginji noted that they were desperately trying to close the portal, but to no avail. Shio said that if Ginji had known about this in advance, he should have reported it, a sentiment Sherry agreed with. Ginji replied that if he had deliberately kept it a secret, he would have already lost his job. Sherry declared that she didn't want anything to do with people like him. Their argument was interrupted by the Minister of Defense, who asked if there had been any changes over the past 6 months. Kyoto Heikan, master of the Gifted Guild, reported that the intervals between portal appearances were becoming shorter. The guildmasters noted that they were managing for now, but they might soon face serious problems. Therefore, a great catastrophe could occur again, just as it had in the past. Kyoto also emphasized that the monsters have become much stronger than before, and when the next great catastrophe strikes, the damage will be colossal. Countermeasures must be taken as soon as possible to prevent this. Ginji noted that this requires suitable candidates to join the guild. Atsushi Tsushima, the principal of Valkyrie Academy, replied that there were more talented students this year than they had anticipated. Furthermore, they will soon be holding a retest. Ginji asked the principal if there were any students worth keeping an eye on, and Atsushi replied that there were. Among the freshmen, Sachi Shiharane and Shizuku Minase stand out, and he has high hopes for them as well. Shizuku is able to freely control the life energy of her artifact, Luminor. Sachi, meanwhile, wields the artifact Geborg, which is capable of generating explosive energy. The masters noted just how powerful and rare their artifacts are. Sherry didn't even hide the fact that she wanted Shizuku to join her guild. Ginji asked if there really was no one else besides these two. The principal replied that he would be able to see for himself during this exam. He also added that it would be great if the school had students who were skilled in defense. That position had been vacant for a long time, and they hadn't been able to find a suitable candidate for quite a while. Ginji pointed out that there was a student at the school whose father had held that role for a long time. Perhaps he could very well take that position. The teachers weren't quite sure who he was talking about, but Kureha added that it was Hinata, the very same boy who had stripped completely naked during the exam. The principal replied that he was still a student at the school, and Ginji found that hard to believe. He said he didn't understand him since he possessed an ineffective artifact yet continued to fight. In Ginji's opinion, that was far too foolish. Atsushi, however, replied that this wasn't entirely true, and that he would soon show what his artifact was capable of. The day of the retake exam arrived, the day when students are given a second chance to determine their ranking. It's rare to see so many people at a school event. This year, the test will take place in a D-rank portal. It was strange for the guild masters to see anticipation on the students' faces ahead of an exam where participants often sustain serious injuries. The principal said that the modern world is full of bad news, so everyone needs a break. He also thanked Sherry for providing security services through their guild. But Sherry replied that there was no need, since training successors was their guild's job. And besides, she was paying special attention to Shizuku. She noted that, as expected, Shizuku mingles with her peers, and Atsushi wondered how she had figured that out. Sherry replied that, as guildmaster, she could see this from a distance. She was also curious if there were any other students worthy of her attention. Perhaps Hinata and Akane. This year's retake exam will take place in the labyrinthine garden of Portal D. The first group didn't particularly impress. On the contrary, they were a disappointment. The students were unable to stand up to the monster, and it seemed as though they were all about to perish at its hands right then and there. However, the Dolores Guild, which was in charge of security for this trial, didn't let the students die and stepped in to protect them. Unfortunately, though, the trial was over for those students. Spectators were impressed by the Dolores Guild, which quickly came to the students' aid whenever they found themselves in critical situations. This year, drones will also be flying inside the portal to ensure safety at the venue itself. The Dolores Guild truly demonstrated top-tier skill, living up to its title as an S-rank guild. But let's not forget the exam rules. While inside the portal, students must earn points. Points can be earned, for example, by obtaining magic stones while hunting monsters, or by collecting ore and various plants inside the portal, which will earn them additional points. Participants should also keep in mind that this year, their teamwork will be evaluated. Therefore, it's not just how many stones or gems they collect that matters, but also their teamwork. Their success or failure will be displayed on screen and broadcast live. The students have only 1 hour to complete the entire exam, so they'd better hurry. Akane and Hinata will go next, after the first group finishes. Akane noted that the whole thing looks unpleasant. After all, she and Hinata take this seriously, while the others treat it like a show. She asked if this annoyed Hinata, since it seems like they were simply being belittled. But Kurimura, who had overheard their conversation, interrupted and said there was nothing wrong with that. After all, they were the center of attention. But Akane and Hinata didn't really understand what he was talking about. Kurimura replied that the broadcast of the retake exam was currently trending at the top of the viewership charts. He asked Hinata if he would put on a show like he did last time. Hinata was about to answer when Akane interrupted, asking if that was really why he'd come here. To which Kurimura replied that he was just passing by. However, leaning on Hinata, he told him that this day is important for everyone and nothing bad should happen. Shu seemed to want to say something, but his own fear kept him from doing so. Just then, an announcement came over the PA system that the exam for the second group would begin very soon, so the participants were to gather near the portal. Kurimura wished them luck, but he clearly didn't mean it. Shu tried to say something but got scared and decided to just run away. Akane didn't understand what had happened to him, since today he seemed even stranger than before. However, they didn't have time to chat since the exam for the second group was about to begin. The teacher reminded the students that they would have a device with them that they could use in an emergency to call for help. As soon as they sent a signal, the Dolores Guild would immediately rush to their aid. And since everyone was aware of the rules, it was time to begin the retake exam. The second group was of particular interest to both the instructors and the spectators, since Sachi, who possessed a powerful artifact, was among them. But besides her, there were also other, equally interesting participants. Most of the spectators also hadn't forgotten Hinata, particularly his first entrance exam, and their first enemy was a giant monster, an ogre, which many found to be quite difficult right from the start. The ferocious beast was enormous and attacked quickly, without waiting for the enemy to make a move. Many thought that this would be the end for Hinata and Akane, but that wasn't the case at all. Today's Hinata was a far cry from the guy who had run around naked during the exam trying to pass it. Jinji was also watching the broadcast and was surprised to see how much the boy had changed. The rest of the viewers were also pleasantly surprised. Guildmaster Sherry noted that this was the first time she'd seen a sacred relic capable of changing one's appearance. After all, everyone had previously considered him a useless nobody. But despite that, the principal was merciless toward those without talent. However, if a person had no potential, he wouldn't even have been able to get into Class E. Therefore, Sherry surmised that Hinata was actually no ordinary boy and would be able to pleasantly surprise everyone in the future. Principal Atsushi replied that her guess was correct and that he had high hopes for the boy. Meanwhile, Hinata and Akane continued to easily dispatch the monster. Even though Hinata was the center of attention, this was, after all, a team exam. That's why Akane kept up as well. After all, she'd trained hard to become stronger too. They made an excellent duo since Akane wields a ranged weapon while Hinata can act as a shield or switch to close-range attacks. That's exactly how they operated. While Akane distracted the monster, Hinata bided her time for the decisive strike. Their teamwork was incredible. Even though just a short while ago, they had seemed like candidates for expulsion even from Class E. As stated in the rules, a magic crystal dropped from the monster, granting them additional ranking points. Hinata thanked Akane for her help, saying she'd done a great job, and she replied in kind. However, Kurimura was secretly watching them, waiting for the moment when Hinata and Akane would find themselves in a critical situation. Akane noted that their training had truly paid off, and that the feeling of power was simply wonderful. Hinata agreed with her, because thanks to those rigorous training sessions, he had indeed become much stronger. He had managed to unlock the Fist of Rage, a technique that unleashes all his accumulated power in an instant. He had acquired this skill along with the Rage suit. He was able to achieve this in just 2 weeks. Even though he can't wear the suit all the time, that won't stop him. While Hinata was completely lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice an enemy appearing behind him. However, Akane reacted instantly and killed the small monster. Hinata noted to himself that Akane compensates for his weaknesses. Thanks to her efforts, the power of her artifact has increased significantly. In addition, he began to spot enemies more easily, just like Akane herself. It didn't matter to them who they were facing, a huge monster or a group of goblins. They continued to work together, relying on one another. Akane easily took out the smaller monsters, leaving the stronger ones for Hinata, and their teamwork ultimately led to victory. Compared to their previous selves, they're on a whole different level now. Now Hinata also has a finishing move, so retaking the exam should be a piece of cake for him. Akane noted that they had succeeded once again and earned even more magic crystals. At this rate, they'll complete the entire retake exam together and move up to the next grade. However, Kurimura wasn't satisfied with their pace and was disappointed that they hadn't died at the hands of the monsters. He was beside himself with rage. Shu tried to calm him down, but to no avail. Kurimura couldn't believe that Hinata had managed to defeat the Orga. He thought that perhaps Akane had done it all, but no. Kurimura began to hate Hinata even more, because it turned out he could have beaten him all along. He'd just been sparing him by hiding his true strength. So he decided to change his plan and go back to the original one he and Shu had agreed on. Shu tried to talk him out of it, but Kurimura was beside himself with rage and wouldn't listen to a word. Their original plan was to set the portal boss on the pair. The boss doesn't just leave his lair for no reason, but with the help of Shu's potion-making artifact, he could easily be made to attack someone. Kurimura had thought they'd die from the ogre's attack, and he wouldn't have to resort to such a plan. But everything had changed. Shu had always admired heroes, and after the war began, everyone admired them. He believed that someday he would become a hero just like them, saving people from monsters. But his dream never came true. Shu possessed the stem cells artifact, after which he stopped believing that he would ever become a hero. The artifact's ability is simple. It extracts essence from living beings and turns it into a potion. But on his own, he can't do anything since he doesn't have enough power to attack. That's why he ended up in Class E, where everything went downhill. To make up for his lack of power, he needed a partner with offensive capabilities, and that's how Kurimura became his partner. But that was just an excuse to achieve more, and he felt guilty about his choice. At the same time, though, he also felt a great sense of relief. After all, just when he thought things were bad for him, there was someone else whose situation was much worse. But Hinata, whom he had once looked down on, had become much stronger. So much so that Shu began to doubt his choice even more. He was surprised when Hinata managed to bring to their knees those who had once looked down on him. And while Shu was engaged in self-destruction, Hinata continued to work hard to achieve his goal. But his achievements didn't motivate him to become stronger. On the contrary, they made him even angrier, which is why he went through with it. He helped Kurimura carry out his sinister plan to have the portal boss attack Hinata. Even though he knew it wasn't worth it, he went through with it anyway. And right now, Shu has become the very person he hated so fiercely, and is fighting against the one he so desperately wanted to become. He was standing next to the portal boss, along with Kurimura and another member of their group. With a precise shot, Shu hit the boss squarely in the body, provoking it to attack. His potion took effect quickly, and all that remained was to lead the monster to Hinata. Kurimura pointed out, could the ingredient Shu used for the potion really be Berserker Pheromone, which causes the monster to attack whoever has the potion's mark on them? He hadn't expected the potion to work even on the portal boss, but Shu began to object, saying that it seemed they were going too far. Kurimura didn't share his feelings. On the contrary, he thought Shu was being too talkative for someone who had started all this himself. If he were the kind of person capable of such feelings, he wouldn't have objected. But Shu was also playing the victim, and that infuriated Kurimura. However, he had a backup plan of his own that Shu didn't know about. Kurimura said it was time for them to leave, but Shu stopped him and asked where they were going. In response, Kurimura poured the remaining potion on Shu, making him the boss's target. Kurimura justified this by saying they needed to destroy all evidence that could lead back to them. Shu realized the situation he was in and how wrong he'd been to make that choice. But it was already too late. He asked Kurimura why he was doing all this, to which Kurimura replied that the teachers would surely start investigating the circumstances surrounding the boss's appearance through the portal, and in that case, they would be expelled if caught. Shu understood everything. Kurimura was trying to pin all the blame on him, but it was too late. The boss was chasing after him, and Shu was too weak to outrun him. He wanted to try using the device to call for help, but Kurimura beat him to it and quietly took it away. Shu realized the situation he was in and that Kurimura had simply abandoned him. On top of that, he wouldn't have time to mask his scent, but he still had one potion left, and despite the risks, he was determined to use it against Hinata. Meanwhile, Akane and Hinata continued to calmly take the exam, killing one monster after another. Akane was glad that, at this rate, she'd be able to move up to Class D. However, suddenly, someone from the forest splashed an unknown liquid on the boy. Hinata didn't understand what had happened, and Akane asked if he was all right. It was the first time he'd seen a liquid like that, and he didn't know what it was, or, more importantly, whose it was. Just then, Shu emerged from behind the trees, and Hinata was surprised to see him, especially since he was covered in wounds. Behind him appeared that same portal boss, but now it was attacking Hinata instead of him, and Shu said he'd had enough. Despite this, Hinata continues to protect Shu and blocks the boss's attack. But the boss isn't an ordinary monster, so dealing with him won't be so easy. Even in this situation, when Shu had literally brought death upon himself, Hinata continued to worry about him. Shu didn't understand why he'd done that, why he hadn't let the boss kill him, to which Hinata replied that his life wouldn't end here because he doesn't know how to give up. The viewers were also surprised when they saw the portal boss and began to worry if everything was all right. Sherry ordered the guild members to rescue the students immediately, since this was an S-rank monster they couldn't handle on their own. She also noted that this incident had been caused by someone intentionally. After all, the portal boss usually doesn't leave its lair, because otherwise, the portal would collapse. The director replied that he was aware of this, and had never seen such recklessness before. Only a few people are capable of pulling something like this off. He thought it might be Shu, but he was still more certain that the boy had been set up. At the same time, however, he believed they could now rely on Hinata. Despite the difference in strength between the monster and Hinata, he didn't back down and continued fighting. Akane was worried about her friend because fighting a boss was far from the same as fighting some goblins. Despite this, Hinata managed to save Shu, and together they dodged the enemy's attack. The damage from the boss's previous attack was still taking its toll. The difference lay not only in strength, but also in skill. Yet, even so, Hinata refused to give up. He waited for the moment when he could attack the boss unhindered and managed to land a blow. However, a trick like that wouldn't be enough to defeat him. His blow felt like a tickle to the monster. Hinata didn't look too good, and Akane wanted to help him, but he abruptly pushed her away, telling her to stay back for her own safety. And at that moment, the boss attacked her again, and if he hadn't pushed Akane away, it would have hit her too. The pain was unbearable, and although Hinata knew his chances of winning were slim, he kept fighting. Watching all this from the sidelines, Shu asked him why he wouldn't give up. Akane also shouted at him that he'd be better off giving up and retreating, since they wouldn't be able to handle him. However, Hinata kept fighting. He knew he could absorb some of the damage by using his revenge skill, but he was unlikely to defeat the boss completely. Shu yelled at him to stop, saying it was his fault and that he could leave the monster to him while he escaped. The boy provoked the boss to shift its focus to him, and it worked. Even so, when the monster lunged at Shu, Hinata didn't back down and suddenly attacked it. But that didn't work either, and the boss easily parried his attack. Hinata would already be dead if it weren't for his suit. Shu kept telling him to run away and leave the boss to him, but he wouldn't listen. After all, Hinata couldn't just run away and leave the monster behind, and Shu didn't understand him. But the young man replied that he had to try to save everyone, just as his father had done, a man he respected. Even when his own life was in danger, he never turned a blind eye to others. And if he ran away now, he'd never be able to meet him again. That's why Hinata had to stand his ground against the monster and defeat it, no matter what. The young man continued to dodge the boss's attacks to at least delay it, since Deldoris was surely already on his way. He thought he could hold out until they arrived, but it wasn't that easy. Kurimura watched from the sidelines and was delighted to see his classmate die, effectively by his own hand. And yet, Hinata's overconfidence was his undoing. The young man was unable to defeat the portal boss and died. However, he had completed the quest, the reward for which was a meeting. When he woke up, he found himself in an unfamiliar place. Sitting across from him was an unfamiliar girl who said she had finally been waiting for their meeting, calling him Master. Hinata didn't understand where he was or who this girl in front of him was, since he had just been fighting the portal boss. Could this all be a dream? Or had he died and gone to heaven? But the girl helped him figure it out and told him that he was already dead, or to be more precise, on the brink of death. So there's still a chance of survival. Hinata didn't understand how she'd managed to get behind him so quickly, or what was going on here at all. The girl went on to say that he was alive only because she had summoned him here, so he should be grateful to her. She also said he shouldn't worry. After all, this spiritual world was under her control. Simply put, it's the world inside Hinata's suit, the artifact's inner world. The girl showed him what was happening outside right now and the situation he was in. So if he went back now, he'd hardly be able to fend off the attack and would die for good. Hinata asked her if that meant she had helped him, and she replied that was exactly the case. He thanked her and apologized for doubting his artifact, but the girl replied that it was too early for him to let his guard down, because at this rate, he would definitely die. She could help him, but only once, because she had no strength left. Hinata asked her what he should do, and she said she'd give him a quick lesson. For that, he needed to lean forward a little. After that, the girl suddenly thrust 2 fingers straight into the young man's eyes, which he clearly hadn't expected. The pain was excruciating, but the girl noted that she had fixed his eyes. It seemed he'd forgotten how to use them, since he'd been fighting so recklessly against an opponent he could never have defeated. She noted that his fighting style was too crude, so he should start by learning it properly. At the same time, Hinata's eyes changed slightly. He asked her who she was and what she was doing inside his artifact. The girl introduced herself as the Nameless Traitor, but that only raised even more questions for Hinata. However, he didn't have time to ask them. His time was up, and it was time to return to the real world. He tried to hold her back to ask a few more things, but she replied that he hadn't passed the test yet. If he wanted to know more, he needed to become stronger, and then she would answer all his questions. After all, he must be curious as to why a weapon like an artifact had given him everything that led to the war, and why monsters that kill people had started appearing from the portals. Hinata didn't understand what she was talking about, but he wanted to ask her many questions. As she said goodbye, the traitor told him that they would meet again, and she would look forward to it. When he woke up in the real world, Hinata felt like a different person. He managed to dodge the boss's attack, and Akane was happy that he was all right. Hinata had become faster, and it was easier for him to dodge the enemy's attacks. Akane shouted at him that he had nearly died and that they needed to run away quickly, but Hinata replied that he wasn't going to run away because he intended to defeat the monster. The portal boss kept attacking him, but the young man skillfully dodged its attacks. Whereas before he'd been pinned against a tree, now he felt right at home. Thanks to his new eyes, he could clearly see the boss's attacks and dodge them with ease. In addition to its movements, he could also sense its sinister aura and its intent to kill. This truly frightened him. Hinata began to think it was because he was on the brink of death. But despite that, he could now clearly see the enemy and its weakest point. Now that he could freely dodge attacks and knew the enemy's weak spot, all that remained was to strike with all his might, using the Revenge skill. By this time, the members of the Deldoris Guild had already found them and rushed over to rescue them. However, they noticed something strange. So they decided not to rush and to consult with the guildmaster first. Meanwhile, Hinata rushed to attack the boss without a second thought. He managed to dodge the monster's attack and land a blow right on its weak spot. He succeeded. The blow was so powerful that the monster was completely knocked out. And in the end, the C-rank boss of Portal D was successfully defeated by Hinata. The spectators couldn't believe their eyes. After all, during his first exam, this guy had been running around naked trying not to die at the hands of an ordinary goblin. And now he'd managed to defeat a boss. Hikari was also incredibly happy for her older brother and his success on the exam. Even Shizuku was extremely surprised when she saw what Hinata was capable of. However, while some rejoiced in Hinata's success, Others took an interest in it with less than benevolent intentions. After such a battle, Hinata was exhausted, but thanks to Akane and Shu, he was at least able to get back on his feet. Kurimura was beside himself with rage and couldn't believe that his plan had failed again. He couldn't understand how it was possible, how the boy had managed to defeat the portal boss himself, and why his movements had suddenly improved. Kurimura wanted to kill Hinata with his own hands. The guy who was in his group tried to stop him, but to no avail. But one of the guild members was recording their conversation, and the guildmaster and the director were also watching. Sherry ordered the insolent young man to be arrested immediately, but the director asked her not to rush into it. Atsushi said it would be better for them not to intervene, but rather to observe the situation. After all, if they stopped Kurimura halfway through, they would only further inflame his anger, which might cause him to try something like this again. Sherry asked if the principal really wanted Hinata to deal with him on his own, and Atsushi replied that was exactly the case. She asked again if that was really a good idea, since he seemed to be completely exhausted. Atsushi replied that if anything went wrong, the guild members would step in. But for now, everything should be fine. Meanwhile, Kurimura was charging headlong, straight at the exhausted Hinata. He was confident that with just one blow, he could finish the guy off and put an end to his revenge. But even though he was exhausted, Hinata didn't back down and easily blocked his enemy's attack. This infuriated Kurimura, and he began wildly swinging his fists, trying to break through Hinata's defense. However, it was all in vain, and Hinata found an opening to counterattack. Hinata managed to knock him to the ground and asked Kurimura if it was true that he had orchestrated all of this. Grabbing him, Hinata said that trying to kill him or even just hurt him was enough. But Kurimura refused to give up and tried to strike Hinata. Hinata responded in kind, headbutting him in the forehead. Kurimura never imagined things would turn out this way, that the very person he'd been bullying would manage to take him down. Hinata told him that all this time he'd simply been holding back, and that only made Kurimura even angrier. In a fit of rage, he recklessly attacked Hinata to get revenge for everything. But Hinata was no longer the person he used to be, and he had no intention of simply taking the blows. On the contrary, he counterattacked. He managed to defeat him without even using the artifact. And with that, Kurimura's school days came to an end. The principal noted that Hinata and Kurimura exemplified the difference between those who worked hard and those who did nothing. From that moment on, the exam for the second group could be considered over. The day after the test, Hinata and Akane's school life changed dramatically. Whereas before everyone had looked at them with contempt and a desire to kill them, now everyone smiles when they see them. Akane noted that now everyone was paying attention to them, even though they'd been ignored before. And now, they were acting as if nothing had happened. But Hinata was happy with how his school days had changed, and that he'd managed to prove his strength. Akane also said that people now treat them differently, and she couldn't help but be happy about it. Even those who seemed to have written them off had changed their attitude toward them. Shizuku noted that Hinata had managed to impress her yesterday, and in a way, she'd even changed her mind. But despite that, there's no way he could have won in Class A. Akane asked Hinata what was going on with Shizuku, since that kind of behavior really drives her crazy. Hinata replied that everything was fine. She's always like that, so her words should be taken as a compliment. However, while some were happy for Hinata, others secretly wanted to harm him. Meanwhile, Shu had been expelled for his involvement in the attempted murder of students during the exam and was packing his things to go home. The end result of his choice, expulsion, was exactly what he feared most. Hinata was waiting for him at the dormitory exit, and Shu was surprised to see him. Shu said he'd arrived just in time since he'd wanted to say goodbye to him before leaving. Hinata wanted to ask him about what had happened, but didn't know where to start, and Shu replied that there was no need since he was entirely to blame. And to tell the truth, expulsion wasn't the worst outcome for him, since Kurimura had been sent to a juvenile detention center for attempted murder. As for him, he'd merely been expelled, deemed a victim, just like him and Akane, so he had nothing to complain about. Hinata looked at him with a downcast expression, but Shu told her not to look at him that way, since it wasn't her fault. And despite all this, he wouldn't give up and would continue his research using his artifact. As a parting gift, Shu gave him a potion he'd created using his artifact. The principal said that even though his artifact lacked offensive power, it could still be useful thanks to potions. So he prepared a letter of recommendation for him so that he could continue his studies outside of Valkyrie Academy. Shu noted that while Hinata might not have the talent of a warrior, he would surely find his calling in potion making. After all, seeing Hinata's determination, he realized that he too must not give up and must continue on his path. So Hinata can be sure that he won't fall into despair, and one day he'll become much stronger. Finally, Shu said that he sincerely regretted what had happened and that he was partly to blame for it. And despite all this, he is grateful to Hinata for everything he has done for him. At this point, their paths diverge, and from this day forward, Hinata will continue on his path to becoming the strongest hero, while Shu will seek his place in a different field. Meanwhile, the principal was pleased with another successful school year, noting that it had gone just as smoothly as the previous one, even despite that situation. However, he noted that thanks to that, they were able to attract attention, and it seems that even Guildmaster Sherry was pleased with everything, and very impressed as she watched the heirs train. She also mentioned that she would be happy to accept Hinata as an intern. This is truly surprising, since they rarely offer apprenticeships. The principal also noted that first years are now officially allowed to go to the front lines. However, to do so, they need to join a guild, and not everyone will be able to do that. The secretary also added that a student must be in Class C or higher. Would Hinata be able to manage, given that he's in Class E? But that was no longer a problem. After all, as of that day, Hinata had been transferred to Class B, and Akane to Class C. On the one hand, Hinata was glad that he'd managed to move up a class, but not everything went so smoothly. After all, most of the students in his new class doubted his exam results. In addition to Class B, there's also Class A, and both are very different from Class E, including in terms of the curriculum. In this class, Hinata saw opportunities for growth that weren't available in Class E, so he needs to work hard to avoid slipping up. But one of the students in Class B was preventing him from being alone with his thoughts. He approached Hinata, ostensibly asking what it was like to be in a new class. The boy introduced himself as Subaru Arakawa, saying that he had enrolled in Class B so he could eventually move up to Class A. Suddenly, his smile turned to contempt, and he asked Hinata how he'd managed to fool everyone on the exam. He argued that in all his time at school, he had never heard of a student from Class E suddenly transferring to Class B. Subaru noted that everyone was curious about how the young man had managed to get into their class so quickly, and whether he truly possessed the skills that entitled him to be in Class B. Therefore, he believes that the incident during the retake exam was a trick the boy pulled off unnoticed. Subaru is certain that the members of the Deldoris Guild defeated the portal boss, but Hinata just laughed in response to his accusations and didn't want to say anything back. He met a guy like that in his previous class, and it seems like there's someone like Kurimura in every class. Meanwhile, the teacher reminded the students that they would all remain in Class B until the next exam. He also noted that the new students shouldn't let their guard down, since they should always aim for Class A. This year, only one student was able to transfer to Class A, which means the gap in their skills is still significant. Therefore, if they want to join a good guild, they must work on closing that gap. Subaru asked the teacher what he meant by that. Did he really think they were just goofing off here? And pointed out that the training portal was useless for practice. Unfortunately, however, they don't have any other options for practice yet. However, students who have advanced to Class C or higher will now receive a temporary license as proof of their abilities. With a temporary license, students can enter Class C and D training portals. It's important to remember that to do so, they'll need to be accompanied by a guild recognized by Deldoris in the state. The teacher noted that this is what's known as an internship. Most guild members were able to gain valuable experience while still in school, but students should remember that this can be life-threatening, yet a worthy position is worth all the trials. Hinata pondered his teacher's words. Perhaps he too would be able to land an internship with someone. During lunch break, Akane came to see him. Even though they were in different classes, they remained close friends. She was curious to know how he was doing in Class B, and Hinata replied that he didn't quite feel at home there. Akane was in a similar situation. Even though she had moved from Class E to Class C, she found it unpleasant to be on the receiving end of her classmates' prying stares. She also added that she'd recently run into a guy who looked like Kurimura. Upon hearing this, Hinata confirmed his theory that there are people like that in every class. Akane also wanted to talk to him about the internship and find out what he thought about it. She noted that as interns, they could get paid for their work. Hinata was hearing about this for the first time, so he asked how much they could earn from it. Akane replied that it all depends on the guild and the portal, but even so, the pay is high. Much more than for defeating goblins in the training portal, where they only pay 150 yen. Hinata thought this was a great opportunity to earn money just by going to school, while also leveling up his skills. That way, he'd be able to help his mom and pay Hikari's hospital bills. His growth in the training portal had already reached its limit, so it was time to move on to the next stage. He asked Akane how to apply for an internship at a guild. Akane replied that recruitment notices are posted on the bulletin board in front of each department. She also noted that there are always a lot of people there. Hinata was already eager to see the results, but Akane stopped him, saying that there would be many more recruitment rounds and that the application screening process was currently underway. So she suggested they submit their applications together after school, and Hinata was fine with that. Suddenly, Sachi appeared next to them. She also wanted to apply with them. The group was surprised to see her there and asked what she was doing there. Sachi replied that her classroom was right next to theirs, so there was nothing strange about her being there. She also noted that Hinata had finally been able to prove himself, and now they could work together. So she wanted to apply with them, but Hinata said no. Sachi was disappointed and didn't understand why he was turning her down. Hinata replied that he couldn't train with her, and they would surely fail the qualifying round. Subaru was also watching them. He was surprised to see Sachi standing next to the boy who had recently transferred. He wanted to find out what she was doing there and how she was connected to Hinata. He intended to join the same guild where Hinata would be interning in order to uncover his true nature. In the end, Sachi applied to the same place as Akane and Hinata. Together, they applied to the B-rank guild Elben for the D-rank portal. Upon returning home, Hinata wanted to rest and hoped he would be accepted for the internship, since they could only accept 3 people. Suddenly, the traitor appeared on the bed and asked if this was really something he needed to worry about right now. Noting that, with his current skills, it would be strange to die under such simple circumstances, Hinata asked what she was doing here in the real world. She replied that her body was bound to his, so there was nothing strange about her being there. Hinata pointed out that this was actually strange, since during their last meeting she had said they would meet again once he became stronger. The traitor explained that at the time, she had simply answered his question by saying he needed to become stronger, but that wasn't a requirement for meeting her. Since his growth had slowed significantly, she decided to intervene. But what surprised Hinata even more was that the girl was able to pick up a book. She said there was nothing to be surprised about, since artifacts emerge from the void and can interact with physical objects. Despite this, Hinata still asked her who she really was. The girl replied that she had already introduced herself as the nameless traitor, but if he wanted to call her by name, she wouldn't mind. So if it made him feel better, from now on he could call her Nanashi, which also means nameless. The next day, Hinata was quite distressed, and Akane became curious about what had happened to him. However, he replied that everything was fine, not wanting to reveal Nanashi's presence. Akane was still worried and asked again if he was lying to her. And in response, Hinata decided to ask her something. He asked if she could see anyone standing next to him, but Akane didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. She got really scared, thinking there was some kind of invisible monster there. But Hinata reassured her, saying it was just a joke. Hinata realized that other people couldn't see Nanashi or the system window that had appeared. Only the user could see all of this. In other words, just him. Suddenly, Sachi joined them, as if she were already part of their group. Akane told her that Hinata thought someone was standing next to him and asked if Sachi could see anything there. However, no matter how hard Sachi tried, she couldn't see anyone. Meanwhile, Nanashi told Hinata that it was time to train instead of sitting around doing nothing. Ever since yesterday, she's been going on and on about portals and training, saying that with his current skills, he'd die easily. But there was something that kept bothering Hinata, because yesterday, Nanashi had mentioned something he wasn't ready to know yet, since he was still too weak. And Hinata wanted to find out what Nanashi was hiding from him. Just then, teacher Gonzo approached them to announce the results of the guild applications. He also noted that he was happy to see the students from Class E who had moved up to Classes B and C. Hinata asked him what had happened, since he had come to see them. The teacher explained that he had come to give them something, since he was in charge of the selected students. These were the responses to their guild internship applications, and Akane and Sachi had been successfully accepted. Gonzo said there were still a couple of matters to settle, so he would be waiting for them in the conference room after school, and Hinata asked what about him. The teacher replied that Hinata hadn't made the cut. Instead, they'd chosen a student from Class A, and since they needed a strong marksman, they chose Akane. Subaru, who had also applied with them, was surprised because he hadn't made the cut either. The teacher also said that dropping out halfway through wasn't an option. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to participate in raids for 6 months. Gonzo added that there was no need to be upset, since other guilds were also recruiting. And just then, he received a special invitation from the S-rank guild, Deldoris. Hinata was very surprised to learn that he had been invited to intern at such a powerful guild. Despite this, after school, the young man continued to train in the training portal. Nanashi congratulated him on clearing out the monsters in the portal, though she wasn't particularly happy about it. Hinata also completed the quest to collect hobgoblin magic stones. Now even the training portal posed no problem for him, and he needed to move on to something more challenging. He just needed to raise his power by another 5 points, and then he'd be able to use the rage suit freely. He asked Nanashi if there was another way to increase his power, but she replied that it was useless. After all, going into battle in that state would be tantamount to courting certain death. Nanashi asked him what had happened to the eyes his body had granted him. She was referring to those very mysterious eyes of the warrior that had helped Hinata defeat the portal boss. They allow one to foresee the enemy's movements, which is a rather useful ability. However, its main drawback is that it consumes a lot of energy, so Hinata still can't use them for very long. Nanashi noted that it was most likely due to his low intelligence, and Hinata asked what exactly that meant. The girl explained that it's the ability to perceive and understand supernatural phenomena. Simply put, it's the power needed to activate magic. Upon hearing about magic, Hinata was very surprised, but Nanashi didn't share his reaction, since all artifacts are mysterious and powerful. He said he'd heard of monsters capable of using magic, but had never seen humans capable of such a thing. Nanashi explained to him that, with the right transmission, anyone can use magic. However, the talent one possesses after the transmission depends on the individual. At the moment, Hinata possessed only 5 magic points, which was extremely low. Upon learning this, Nanashi momentarily resented Hinata for his weakness. She said it seemed they would have to use a different method to make him stronger. Nanashi admitted that, in fact, he could have tested himself in the C-Rank portal a long time ago. However, he wouldn't be able to fully unleash his abilities there, so it was time to move on to a new level of training and put the school portal behind them. Nanashi said that if Hinata wants to get stronger, he needs to listen to her carefully. After all, once he enters this portal, he'll immediately feel the difference in his skills. Inside, the portal looked like an abandoned room filled with traps. Hinata didn't even have time to realize what was happening before an iron rod slammed into him. And right after that, hundreds of similar rods piercing his body over and over again. And that's when he realized that all his previous work and pain were nothing compared to this. He was terrified and woke up back in the real world, still not understanding what had happened. Nanashi explained that the portal she had created transported only his soul, not his physical body. Therefore, while his soul was in the portal, his body remained defenseless. Nanashi laughed because Hinata's face clearly said, "That's not fair." She noted that he should be more humble, since many more deaths awaited him ahead. And with that attitude, he'd never grow stronger. Though Hinata didn't quite understand her words yet. The girl reminded him that at the beginning of his journey, he couldn't use the impenetrable suit because certain conditions were required to activate. Hinata assumed she was referring to emotions like anger and others, but Nanashi said that was only part of the requirements. His suit is far from as simple as it seems, and emotions alone aren't enough to unleash its power. Hinata asked if he really needed to clear out that portal to activate the suit. Nanashi replied that he was on the right track. Since his body is vulnerable while his soul is in the portal, Nanashi suggested moving their training to a safer location. She said that to awaken the suit, Hinata must demonstrate his strength and pour his soul into it. Death must mean nothing to him. His task is to overcome it at any cost. It all sounded easy and inspiring in theory, but in practice, it turned out to be much more difficult. Hinata died over and over again, and each time it felt like the first. But no matter what, he kept getting back up and returning to the portal. Nanashi told him that even if he was tired of all this, he had to push past his limits. He might be afraid of death, but he had to face it head-on without giving in to fear. She pointed out that those who face death are called heroes in this world, and Hinata knows this perfectly well himself. The next day, Hinata looked pretty battered, and that last attempt had nearly been his undoing. This time, everything was different. Real pain and death. That wasn't the kind of boundary he was used to. Even though Nanashi had given up when she saw his hesitation and called him a coward upon returning to the artifact, he understood that he wouldn't truly die. But something inside him was unsettling, and today is the day he'll become an apprentice at the Del Doris Guild. Upon entering the trainees' meeting hall, Hinata immediately felt the pressure from the other participants. Besides Shizuku, Haito Hebishima was also there, plotting something against Hinata. Also present was Clobage, who at first glance seemed like a quiet type. Rounding out the list of Class A apprentices was Akino Heikan. Unlike Hinata, they were all from Class A, and that bothered him a little. However, another intern turned out to be Subaru, who openly hated him, claiming that the internship at Del Doris might prove too difficult for Hinata. Shizuku asked him why he hadn't gone with his classmates from Class B. Subaru replied that unlike Hinata, he had been in Class B from the very beginning, and his skills were much closer to hers than to Hinata's. Akino told him that now it was clear why Subaru had been in Class B all this time, since he couldn't tell the difference in their skills. Subaru knew Akino, since she had also been in Class B before. Akino asked what Chloe thought about this, and he replied that he wasn't interested. And besides, Subaru wasn't worth his attention. His words stung Subaru, and he was about to challenge him to a skills comparison right then and there. Suddenly, a strange sensation came over him. Hinata felt as if he'd been pierced by an iron spear, just like back in the portal. Chloe told Subaru that, unlike him, Hinata had noticed that sensation, and that was precisely why there was a difference between them. The artifact Chloe possessed was invisible blades, which earned him the nickname Ghost Archer. Despite this, Hinata managed to catch one of his blades, and when Chloe saw this, he was greatly surprised. Shizuku pointed out that Hinata was sweating profusely just from being in the same room with them, so if they continue to act so pathetic, she'd rather drop out of this internship. At the end, she added that weak people like them were nothing but a burden, and Hinata was about to reply when the teacher walked into the classroom. It was Mr. Gonzo, the teacher in charge of selecting participants. He asked if everyone was present and apologized for calling them in so early, since this was the only time they had free. Since everyone was already there, he would explain all the details and nuances, as their internship would begin in a week. Shizuku's words really hurt Hinata, and he wanted to prove to her that she was deeply mistaken in thinking he was a weakling. When he got home, Hinata was angry and demanded that Nanashi open the portal immediately. The girl didn't quite understand where his rush and all that energy were coming from. Nanashi asked if it was really all because of Shizuku's words, and Hinata was surprised to learn that she had heard everything. She had called him weak, and he couldn't argue. After all, he really was a coward who was afraid to face her head-on. But despite that, he wouldn't just sit idly by just because someone had called him a weakling. So he wouldn't back down so easily. On the contrary, he would become stronger over the course of this week. Upon returning to the portal, Hinata continued to hone his skills. This time, he didn't fall for simple traps, and even managed to dodge them successfully. He realized he didn't need to act rashly. It was better to look around carefully and think before taking a step. After all, everything in the world has a reason, and so do the traps that react to him. In this way, Hinata became better at distinguishing and noticing where attacks were coming from. His agility had improved significantly compared to before. Even a few obstacles didn't stop him, since he was thinking about how to parry a blow rather than running blindly. However, he didn't always succeed, and the moment he let his guard down, he immediately paid the price. He had learned to anticipate the outcome and act preemptively, but that wasn't enough. He still had a lot to learn to avoid perishing at the hands of the enemy, and he kept training, because he had no intention of giving up, returning to the portal time and time again. Eventually, after a long time, he reached the portal's boss. At first glance, it seemed he would have a hard time defeating it, since it was the boss itself. However, compared to the trials he had already endured, such a monster was nothing. And as a reward for his efforts, he received the skills Concentration and Ultra Reflex. A week passed, and the long-awaited day of the Deldora's Guild's training session arrived. The guild members prepared thoroughly to avoid any problems. The S-Rank Vice Guildmaster, Hatsuma Jin, served as an assistant to Guildmaster Sherry. He reported to the Guildmaster that everything was ready and they could begin. Jin noted that she was in a good mood today, and Sherry replied that she was, because she was eagerly awaiting the students. In her opinion, they've been lacking exactly this kind of talent for a long time, and given the labor shortage, the students would be a lifesaver. Shizuku, of course, was of particular interest, but the guildmaster said that the guy in the suit would be coming too. Last time, Jin hadn't noticed anything special about the guy, and judging by how hard the first test was for him, he was weaker than any of them. However, the vice guildmaster was deeply mistaken in his assessment of Hinata. Meanwhile, teacher Gonzo had already brought the students to their internship site. The students showed their respect for the guild and expressed their gratitude for this opportunity. The aura emanating from Hinata was noticeably different from what it had been before. Sherry explained to the students that today they would enter an unexplored C-rank portal. She is confident that the students learned this at the academy, and, as usual, they will split into 3 teams. Class A would take the lead, as they were the strongest and most capable. 2 students from Class B will take their places in the center alongside the Vice Guildmaster. Today, they must battle the portal's boss and seal it once and for all. Sherry also said she really hopes the students will understand, since this isn't a training exercise. It's a real battle. Shizuku asked if even for Deldora's, a C-rank portal posed the challenge, and the Guildmaster replied that it did. Their job is to prevent portals from opening and protect the lives of citizens. In their view, there's no such thing as an incapable person, so they seize every opportunity. Of course, not everyone is like that. There are those who do this for money and fame. For example, Kureha chose the former, and Sherry noted that it was a great honor for them to welcome his great-granddaughter into their ranks. Since everyone understood everything, it was time to head for the portal. Jin asked the group not to split up, otherwise he wouldn't be able to protect them if anything happened. Even now, Subaru found time to show his dislike for Hinata once again. Subaru asked the Vice Guildmaster if he was always placed in the center, but the Vice Guildmaster replied that this wasn't the case at all, since he usually stood on the front lines. As a rule, warriors on the front lines take down powerful enemies, but the portals are simply teeming with them. That's why you can never let your guard down, no matter where you're positioned. Last time, Hinata fought an S-rank boss, and it seems this time he'll face an enemy slightly stronger than the last one. It was time to begin the training and prepare to seal the portal. It was a C-rank portal called the Path to the Hungry Beast, and when the central group entered it, a pile of magic crystals lay scattered on the ground. It seemed to be the work of the front line. Subaru was surprised that they'd caused such a commotion in the portal so quickly, while Hinata, meanwhile, noticed a sudden enemy attack. He managed to react quickly and fended off the flying threat. It was a cannibal monkey, which usually attacks from ambush and then swarms its prey. However, for the Vice Guildmaster of Deldoris, such monsters were nothing. In the blink of an eye, he dispatched the monster with a single swing of his sword, and Hinata realized just how great the difference between them was. Jin ordered a search for the remaining monsters, as they must have been hiding somewhere nearby. He also noted that the enemy was lying in wait, which was precisely why no one had been able to spot it. Meanwhile, Hinata had managed to spot him as soon as he stepped through the portal, which surprised Jin. It seemed he had indeed been very wrong about the guy in the suit. Meanwhile, the Elben Guild was in a D-rank portal called City of Water Spirits. Akane also began her internship at the same time as Hinata, and while Hinata had Subaru with him, Akane ended up with a partner who was even stronger. For Sachi, with her artifact, dealing with the monsters in that portal was no trouble at all. Still, Akane was worried that she might accidentally kill her with such a powerful shot. Sachi replied that she would never have made such a foolish mistake, so they'd better close the portal as soon as possible and head back. Because of the power of Sachi's artifact, Akane was completely unable to take part in the battles herself. However, she was more worried about whether Hinata was alright. Meanwhile, Hinata continued to kill one monster after another. While this would have been a huge problem for him before, he was now doing it with confidence. Even though Hinata was performing admirably, Subaru continued to doubt him, and while Hinata fought, he simply stood on the sidelines and watched everything unfold. However, this didn't last long because Subaru didn't want Hinata to take all the credit. Subaru possessed the hunting knife artifact, which when used correctly, could pose a serious threat. Jin also took note of their efforts, and the guys looked good from the sidelines. Subaru was still a bit rough around the edges, but he had plenty of attack power and stamina. While Hinata has little stamina, he's capable of making quick decisions. He doesn't overstep his limits by charging headlong into things, and always keeps the situation under control. Moreover, his reaction time is extremely fast, which is a huge help in battle. Jin noted that Hinata reacts faster than some of the team members, and even when it seemed like he was being attacked and cornered by a crowd, he still didn't lose heart. Such instincts can only be developed through real combat. The Vice Guildmaster was very curious to know how the boy had managed to develop such instincts at such a young age. Perhaps he was simply born with such strong combat instincts. But the Vice Guildmaster had no idea what Hinata had been through. During their training sessions with Nanashi, she once asked him what first came to mind when he saw it, and Hinata replied that it seemed poisonous. Nanashi said he'd hit the nail on the head, so to clear the portal, he needed to hone that instinct. A keen sense of danger starts with a simple thought like, there's something there. That's why he needs to learn to tap into each of his 5 senses. With his eyes and ears, he'll be able to sense impending danger. In that case, he'll be able to fend off the threat and counterattack the enemy. Meanwhile, one of the team members approached Jin and asked if he thought there were too many enemies. The Vice Guildmaster noted that this was indeed the case. After all, everything was supposed to end after the front line. But something wasn't right here. Had he underestimated the C-rank portal, or perhaps something had happened within the Guildmaster's group? But that couldn't be. After all, she was among the top 10 people possessing a 5-star artifact. Therefore, there was no way they could have lost to such low-rank monsters. However, the problem lay elsewhere. It also affected the second group. One of the snipers had taken aim directly at Jin, but suddenly Hinata appeared in the crosshairs, and the sniper was surprised that Hinata had managed to spot him. He was quite far away, but even so, the guy managed to spot him, and what's more, to attack him. The sniper reported to command that the mission had failed, and he would continue surveillance, waiting for the next opportunity. Jin asked Hinata what had happened, to which Hinata replied that it seemed someone had been aiming at him. The Vice Guildmaster speculated that it might have been a bandit guild trying to steal the portal's rewards, but attacking an S-rank guild was madness. However, what was far more surprising was that Hinata had spotted an enemy that even he himself hadn't seen. At that moment, one of the guild members shouted that they were in trouble and that the guildmaster was in danger. Jin couldn't believe it, thinking it was ridiculous that Sherry could have fallen into a trap. Just half an hour ago, everything had been calm, and there had been no sign of trouble. Sherry was explaining the tactics to the group, saying that frontline fighters usually leave a few enemies behind for the rear guard. Therefore, they should spread out so they could stay in contact and finish off the remaining enemies. Shizuku asked if that wasn't dangerous, but Sherry explained that it was acceptable in a C-rank portal. Besides, they weren't alone. The Guildmaster of Deldoris herself was with them. She could handle monsters of that level on her own. And these weren't just empty words. Otherwise, she wouldn't have become Guildmaster. The artifact Sherry possessed was truly remarkable. She effortlessly dispatched several enemies with a single wave of her hand. The rumors about her incredible strength turned out to be completely true. Sherry emphasized that, although she could have handled everything on her own, the heroes were on a training mission, and fighting the monsters was in their best interest. Shizuku noted that the monsters' movements in this portal were completely different from those in D-rank dungeons, so they couldn't let their guard down. The Guildmaster was pleased to see how well the kids were handling everything. At the same time, she wondered why Akino wasn't participating in the battle. The girl explained that she needed magic crystals to use the artifact. Sherry said she didn't mind if she took a couple from the defeated monsters. Akino wanted to take the most powerful crystal among them, but Sherry stopped her, saying that one was off-limits. Akino's artifact, Puppeteer, absorbed the crystals from slain monsters, after which her puppet would take on their form and she could control them. Sherry was surprised to see what kind of artifact the girl possessed, since the ability to control defeated enemies is extremely rare. Even though Akino herself wasn't particularly strong, increasing the team's numbers wouldn't hurt. The list of guild candidates kept growing, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to choose the right one. At that moment, enemies approached their group, snipers from the Bandit Guild. Their first target was Guildmaster Sherry, and they assumed that no one would notice them from such a great distance. However, even from that distance, spotting the enemy was no trouble for her. Thanks to their own bloodthirstiness, she was able to spot them with ease. That wasn't the end of it. Dozens of enemies began firing at her, and Sherry ordered the rest to form a protective circle around her, as there were simply too many enemies. Communications weren't working, so she sent one of the guild members to the central group for reinforcements. Shizuku didn't understand what was happening, and Sherry replied that it looked like they'd been ambushed. Akino suggested that this was the work of a bandit guild, and Sherry agreed, noting that they'd chosen an extremely inopportune time to attack. If their goal had been the bounty, they would have waited until the party defeated the boss, since attacking an S-rank guild was too great a risk. Besides, the bullets weren't from artifacts. Ordinary weapons are useless against enemies armed with artifacts, so it seems they were just trying to slow them down. But that wasn't all. It seems someone was controlling the monsters and setting them on the group. Sherry couldn't handle both the snipers and the monsters at the same time, so she left the fight against the monsters to the trainees. The bandits had deliberately chosen the timing of the training session to launch their attack, but their true motives remained unknown, since they surely realized the plan was doomed to fail. Meanwhile, a strange root began to grow right beneath Sherry's feet. The enemies continued to fire at the group, trying to lower their guard. At that moment, the roots quickly enveloped the guildmaster's legs, depriving her of control over the situation. Immediately after that, a magic dart hit her hand, and Sherry didn't understand what it was. When the cannibal monkey attacked her, she thought she could easily defeat it. But the artifact didn't work. It seemed that the dart had paralyzed the artifact's effect, and it was good that Shizuku had repelled the enemy's attack at that moment. The guildmaster also warned the others to take care of their hands, as the enemies possessed technology that could disable artifacts. The boys didn't fully understand how this was possible, because the technology that made it impossible to use the artifact seemed incredible. She replied that her artifact wasn't working, so she would have to rely solely on them for now. There were too many enemies, and the front group's forces were insufficient, so they decided to retreat. But at that moment, someone in the distance was taking aim at Sherry, and it seemed that this was no longer an ordinary sniper. One of the enemies shot her straight from a rocket launcher, because while she was without the artifact, she would not be able to survive. However, at that moment, the central group had already arrived, and Hinata, using the skill Revenge in conjunction with Concentration, with its help, he easily deflected a projectile flying straight at the guildmaster. Everyone was surprised not only by the fact that Hinata was able to repel the attack, but also by the speed with which he did it. Using his eye skill, he discovered that there were about 15 opponents and realized that he couldn't handle them all. In such a case, the best solution was to lower the enemy's guard, regroup, and wait for reinforcements. This helped the frontline team gain time, and Sherry noted that he was a great help to everyone. Still, she wondered why he came alone, to which Hinata replied that he used one skill that allowed him to get there first, but he couldn't use it anymore. Shizuku, on the contrary, asked him why he came at all. Before that, the Vice Guildmaster told him that Hinata was the fastest of them, so he was the one who was able to get there first. So when Shizuku asked, he replied that it was Jin's order. Sherry noted that Jin only gives such orders to those she truly trusts. Hinata has really grown up a lot since then, and he's no longer just a guy in a suit. However, he didn't understand why this upset Shizuku so much, since he, on the contrary, saved them. She admitted that it was true, but she was still tormented by a feeling of weakness, because during the battle, she was useless and could not do anything. Sherry told her not to say that, because when her artifact was deactivated, her help came in handy. Hinata didn't quite understand what the guildmaster was talking about, so she explained that the enemies had a technique that took away the power of artifacts, so they needed to dodge their shots. He wanted to ask Nanashi about this, but he didn't know how to address her, so he decided to whisper into the hand where the artifact was located. Nanashi replied that there was no need to whisper. It was enough to simply ask the question mentally, and she would hear it, adding that the power of the artifact did not come from Sherry's hand. Since magic crystals create space, they leave a mark on the hand, and the resulting artifact depends on the quality of this space. And it looks like it was taken from her, so even if she touches another crystal, the artifact will not return. Nanashi was also amazed at how amazing humans are, while Hinata was more amazed at how anyone could take the artifact away. Heito asked what they were going to do and if they had a plan. Sherry replied that they should just wait until the Vice Guildmaster came to the rescue, as that would be the most sensible decision. At that moment, their group arrived just in time, and an enraged Jin attacked the enemy from behind. He said they would seriously regret underestimating the Deldoras. The Vice Guildmaster ordered the guild members to attack the enemy so that they could feel the full power of Deldoras. Sherry also warned Jin to be careful of their shots, as they possessed a technique to deactivate artifacts. Shizuku noted that, thanks to the reinforcements, it now looked like they would be able to handle them. However, at that moment, something strange happened. Someone seriously injured 2 guild members. The Vice Guildmaster was surprised to see this and did not immediately understand what had happened. Then someone suddenly attacked him, the moment he let his guard down. Yet, it wasn't easy to break him like the ordinary guild members. But he noticed something strange. The artifact they were attacking him with resembled the one that belonged to Sherry. His suspicions were confirmed. It was the enemy who took the artifact from her. The opponent noted that, as expected from Vice Guildmaster Deldoras, he easily dealt with the 5-star artifact. Jin suggested that it seemed like they not only knew how to deactivate artifacts, but also how to use them. However, he had no time to think, because the enemy continued to attack. Jin took this as a sign of disrespect, and in a rage, easily repelled all attacks. Moreover, he was able to counterattack the enemy, but he blocked the blow, and someone else appeared behind him. This enemy's shield was similar to the one that belonged to Hinata's father, and at that moment, another enemy pulled out an artifact pistol. He fired at Jin, who managed to block the shot at the last moment, but still received serious damage. Jin was thrown a fair distance, but Sherry managed to catch him. Hinata realized that there was no way he could make a mistake, considering that the enemy was able to take the artifact and then use it. The shield he has belongs to his father, and this cannot be a coincidence. The enemy approached Jin and said that their client also had his eye on his artifact, so he should give it to him in a good way. Meanwhile, Jin noted that it seemed like their client was a very unpleasant person, since he wanted to get hold of someone else's. He replied that this was not the case at all. It was just that powerful artifacts were now more valuable than any treasure. He also added that their client was smart, because the corpses could also have an artifact left, so they took advantage of this. After numerous experiments on corpses, humanity changed the meaning of life, becoming the most valuable commodity, more valuable than precious stones, and after hearing his words, Hinata understood everything. The shield artifact really belonged to his father. Sherry noted that there had been no previous cases of artifact theft, meaning they must have targeted her first because they were so desperate to get their hands on her. He replied that everything was correct, because even an S-rank guild would have difficulty coping with such a surprise attack, and thanks to this, they could obtain powerful artifacts. Hinata was so angry that he wanted to deal with them with his own hands, but he was stopped by the help of the Sherry artifact. The enemy noted that at first he did not recognize him, but noticing his suit, he realized that he was the same student. Hinata ignored him and wanted to ask where he got the shield-shaped artifact from to finally confirm his theory, but the enemy said that he did not owe him any explanation, adding that it had probably been taken from one of the corpses on which they had been experimenting. Using the skill Concentration, Hinata rushed straight at the enemy, because with this skill, he could temporarily slow down the perception of time in a ratio of 10 to 1. The opponents tried to stop him by using the same artifact they used against Jin, but Hinata was able to dodge the projectile. His reflexes were at a decent level, but it was difficult to resist Sherry's artifact. Sherry noted that he was good, but it was still not enough. He needed to be even faster. Hinata continued to dodge, even though it was sometimes problematic. At the moment when his guard was down, one of the enemies was able to reach him and strike. Immediately after, another opponent used Sherry's artifact in an attempt to finish off Hinata. Jin couldn't allow this to happen and rushed at his opponents to take revenge on them, not only for the guild members, but also for Hinata. However, his attempts were in vain, as even Vice Guildmaster Deldoris found it difficult to resist such a powerful artifact. This was also noted by the enemy who possessed the Sherry artifact, saying that it was all over for them. Suddenly, a couple more enemies appeared behind Jin, but the rest of the group quickly dealt with them. While Jin was targeting the two main enemies, the rest of the guys dealt with the small fry. Meanwhile, Subaru continued to hide, afraid to engage in battle with the others. He thought that if even the Deldoras were powerless here, how could a bunch of students do anything in that case? Haito was of a similar opinion and decided not to interfere, but simply to watch from the sidelines to see where all this would lead. Everything seemed to be going well, but in an instant, the enemy targeted one of the students, Chloe, attacking him with the Guildmaster's artifact. Shizuku managed to react and block the attack, but the blow was too strong and knocked her off her feet. Just one such shield possesses incredible power, and the enemy has as many as 4 of them. Jin asked them why they were doing this at a time when people were forced to unite against monsters, but in response, he heard that greedy people would always exist. As in this case, the soldiers are merely expendable, and the enemy added that Jin himself understands this perfectly well. After all, if you give them powerful artifacts and heal them if they are wounded, they can be sent back into battle, and no matter who fights, it still won't solve the problem of lack of strength. But Hinata categorically disagreed with his words, saying that he was only alive thanks to those he called expendable, and no one in the world can replace these people, nor the emotions of that day and the parting words he received. Thanks to that day and the people who believe in him, he will continue to fight, no matter what. Hinata's unwavering will was answered by his suit, transforming his determination and courage into strength. And the suit of courage was now available to him. The enemy was surprised by how the boy's artifact suddenly changed just because of his emotions, saying that Hinata could have avoided death if he had been a little more cooperative. But Hinata replied that he was not afraid of death. What he was most afraid of was losing and ending up on his knees before his opponent. In an instant, with incredible speed, Hinata was behind the enemy and dealt him a powerful blow. The enemy didn't expect this and tried to fight off Hinata in a rage, but it was useless. Now the difference between them was no longer what it had been before, and defeating him for Hinata was the same as defeating a low-ranking goblin. Using his speed, he immediately moved to the other opponent the moment he let his guard down. With a powerful blow, he literally slammed him into the stone, releasing all his anger. Sherry, of course, knew that his artifact was capable of transformation, but she was shocked to see how much power Hinata possessed. However, in addition to the two main opponents, there were still a bunch of snipers and other monsters. But even so, thanks to the skill acceleration, Hinata easily reached them and defeated them. Hinata's skills continued to amaze him. It was as if he had become a completely different person in just a couple of minutes. Subaru continued to look at him from the side and could not believe what he saw. From the very first time they met, he despised him, saying that he was a liar and unworthy of being in Class B. And yet now it is he who is fighting against everyone, while Subaru himself is only watching what is happening. He couldn't believe that even when the Deldoras couldn't handle the enemy, Hinata still didn't give up and continued to fight. Subaru realized that compared to him, he was simply insignificant, and Hinata was actually a difficult guy. This awakened a sense of determination in him, and he too joined the fight. Jin told everyone that without Sherry's artifact, they were no threat, so now was the best time to attack. While everyone continued fighting, Haito and Akino sat to the side, watching what was happening. As a result, the guys managed to catch all the enemies, and they decided that it was all over. Subaru doubted that the handcuffs would be able to hold them, and Shizuku asked if he didn't know anything about it. She explained that the police use these handcuffs to detain criminals, and if they try to use the relic, they will receive a strong electric shock. Shizuku also said that if he didn't know such basic things, maybe he should study harder instead of relying on brute force. Sherry noted that everyone did a great job and managed it, and Jin added that thanks to Hinata, the Guildmaster's artifact was also saved. However, Hinata himself was far from being in the best condition right now. Just a couple of minutes of using the new suit left him feeling like he was about to die. The Courage suit is draining too much power, which is no surprise since it couldn't even handle the Fury suit, and if Subaru hadn't intervened, things would have ended badly. Despite all this, Shizuku extended her hand to Hinata to help him up. Without understanding why, he apologized to her, and Shizuku asked if he had entered the battle with a well-thought-out plan, but he replied that it was not so. In response to this, Shizuku said that in that case, it would be better for him to leave the academy. Subaru didn't understand why she was acting like this, but Hinata noted that everything was fine. This was her usual state. In any case, Subaru also wanted to apologize to the guy, saying that he himself was not worthy of being in Class B, and asked if Hinata could forgive him for everything he said. Hinata replied that of course he forgives, because he knew from the very beginning that Subaru simply wanted to humiliate him. Besides, he was proud of being in Class B, which meant he worked hard for it. So Hinata understood his anger, even though he himself didn't care. Subaru was overjoyed, because it turned out that Hinata was actually a good guy. Sherry noted that since everything was over, it was time for the thieves to return her artifact, because if they were able to steal it, they could also return it. He replied that he would gladly do so if he could, but he was interrupted by an unknown boy. The guy with green hair said that it was possible because they could just be reinstalled. This guy turned out to be the head of a gang of thieves, and after these words, he mercilessly killed one of his subordinates. He explained that it was possible to return the artifact, but he had no desire to do so. Sherry asked him who he was and why he had just killed his ally, and suddenly Sherry and Jin's bodies seemed to freeze. The pressure was so strong that they couldn't even move a finger. In response to her question, he replied that she shouldn't worry because he doesn't kill people without reason. And he killed him because he behaved recklessly, because the original orders were to steal the artifact and leave, and if they noticed, just run away. But he decided to use the power he had received as his own, and thereby essentially betrayed the organization. Jin noted that it looked like the cube he picked up contained Sherry's artifact. However, he couldn't even move, let alone take it away. The unknown guy also added that this is not the end, because now is the best time to kill them all. And suddenly, swords began to appear from the shadows that could instantly kill the target. He also said that they would soon be able to move, but for now they were leaving, and thanked them for saving him time by gathering all his comrades in one place. But Jin still didn't understand who this guy was, although it seemed that his artifact allowed him to control shadows. Finally, he said that he would take Jin's artifact along with Sherry's artifact. But Hinata, who had regained his second wind, did not agree with his intentions and suddenly attacked him from behind, demanding that he leave the artifacts. The enemy did not understand how he could move, much less how he was able to repel an attack from the shadows. Despite this, he managed to dodge Hinata's blow in time, disappearing into the shadows. He suddenly appeared behind Hinata and wanted to attack him, but he expected such a move. Hinata reacted quickly and used his speed to get right behind his opponent. He didn't have time to dodge the blow, as a result of which, 2 cubes with artifacts fell out of his hands. Hinata and the boss of the Thieves Guild rushed after the artifacts, hoping to catch the right one. While the enemy was letting his guard down, Jin attacked him from behind, but he was able to dodge. Having taken one of the artifacts, he said that was all and disappeared. In the end, he only stated that he remembered Hinata's face and was looking forward to their next meeting. The Thieves Guild managed to escape, and Jin was furious that they had not been able to defeat them. He also apologized to Hinata for having to save him again. However, Hinata's strength was at its limit. After his second awakening, he could barely stand on his feet. Sherry noted that he was exhausted and no longer the guy in the suit who retreats at a critical moment. This means that at the moment he saved her, he couldn't use all his skills and didn't become stronger at the last moment. But even if it was all about the artifact, it didn't change the fact that Hinata was a very interesting guy. Later, at the Kansai headquarters during the Guild Alliance meeting, Sherry reported on the incident. Kyoto noted that the theft of the artifact is an unprecedented case. The Minister of Defense agreed, adding that a solution needed to be found urgently. Sherry explained that to avoid a repeat, it was enough to protect the hand where the artifact was located, because the enemy would not be able to steal it without this. Shio remarked that he seemed to know a guy who controlled shadows. This man was a criminal from the S-Rank guild Niflheim, whose boss was rumored to have such power. Lin Ping noted that they were having more and more problems each time. Meanwhile, Genji asked Sherry what she was going to do next, since she couldn't stay without the artifact. Shio wanted to object, but Sherry replied that she understood everything without his words. Now her artifact no longer belongs to her, and it is unknown whether she will get it back. Therefore, Hatsuma Jin will take over the management of the Deldora's guild. She herself will resign, but she will not be idle, because she still has things to do. And she had a special request to the director of the Valkyrie School. She wanted to ask for a favor. At a general meeting of the Academy's students, an important change in the teaching staff was announced. A temporary employee will join the teaching staff starting today. Their new martial arts teacher will be the former guild master of the Deldoras, Sherry Truman. 2 days have already passed since I completed the portal as an intern. Hinata received a huge amount of magic crystals as a reward, even more than he expected. Nanashi asked him why he was so worried, and Hinata replied that he was thinking of selling them to pay his mother's hospital bills. She told him that he still wouldn't be able to absorb them all, no matter how much he wanted to. And it turned out to be true. When Hinata tried to use the largest crystal, he failed because he had not yet defeated the Earth Mage. Hinata was surprised to realize that he wouldn't be able to cheat the system. Nanashi confirmed that this was indeed the case, and as she had said before, until he put his heart into the power, the suit would not reach its full potential. Back then, he was only able to activate it because he was fighting a strong opponent. But in the end, Hinata still passed out from excessive energy consumption. According to the updates, the Courage suit enhances physical parameters, especially speed. If he hadn't revealed the suit's power back then, he would most likely have simply died. Therefore, to avoid something like this in the future, he needs to become stronger. Hinata absorbed a lot of crystals, thanks to which he was able to increase his characteristics. Now he could safely use the Fury suit. And in addition, he discovered a new skill, Power of Fury. Nanashi was happy to watch him grow stronger. Another day at the academy continued to surprise Hinata, and he thought that the strangest news would be that Sherry became a teacher. But that was not the case. The former head of Class B announced that Sherry Truman would be the head of class from that day forward. Subaru didn't quite understand how she managed to become a leader in just a couple of days. He also didn't understand why she chose their class and not Class A, since he was much stronger than them. Meanwhile, it seemed that she was targeting their class for a reason. Moreover, she was targeting someone specific, and the main reason why she became their leader was Hinata himself. However, Hinata himself did not understand what had attracted her attention so much, and whether it was because of the cube. Then he asked if he could keep the cube with the shield artifact for himself, without any malicious intent. He explained that this artifact belonged to someone dear to him, but Sherry refused, saying that the subject was too important for research. But despite this, she then promised that she would treat him with care. Still, it would be stupid to be upset about it. So Hinata didn't understand what was going on, since he had never waited for lunch break to hide from Sherry's eyes before. Meanwhile, during lunch break, Chloe and Akino from Class A met, and Chloe wanted to ask her something. Akino was very surprised and embarrassed when he called her by name. Chloe was interested to know from her about Hinata, what she thought of him and what impression he made on her. Akino replied that she found him pathetic, but Chloe replied that she didn't mean his looks, but his strength. He asked her who she thought would win if he fought him. Without thinking twice, Aquino replied that of course he would have won, if he had won outright. But that was not the answer Chloe wanted to hear. After all, if you compare their skills, even without special strength, Hinata's speed of movement surpassed his. Haito joined them, asking Chloe why he didn't challenge Hinata to a fight then, since fighting people interested him much more than fighting monsters. He noted that such an opportunity will arise, as the Academy's military festival will take place very soon. During lunch break, Akane and Sachi also wanted to see Hinata. Akane was curious to know how his internship went, but Subaru answered instead of Hinata, saying it was incredible. Akane didn't quite understand who Subaru was, so she decided to find out everything from Hinata himself. And suddenly Subaru asked them to accept him into their team. But Sachi told him that no way, and Subaru didn't understand the reason. She explained that he was too pushy and abrupt, so he was not suitable for them, after which a small conflict arose between them. Hinata was also interested to know how Akane's internship went, But unfortunately, Sachi took all the glory, again, as expected. However, something else was bothering Akane. The feeling that someone was watching them. She asked Hinata if he knew the two strangers hiding behind the door with a scary aura. Akane noted that they had been keeping an eye on him ever since she and Sachi came to them, and she was interested to know why they had such a special interest in him. Subaru emphasized that Hinata was like a target today, first by Miss Sherry and now by someone else. And suddenly he shouted to the two of them to hide better because they were easy to recognize. They turned out to be the guys from Class A, and Hinata was of particular interest to them. Sachi noted that the guy with glasses was Deba, a senior from Class A who was competing for first place among the second years. Hinata didn't really understand why he had attracted the attention of another student from Class A. They came here to invite Hinata to their magical item research club. The guys tried to lure him in various ways, even saying that after joining, his fighting power would increase to 3 million. Akane asked Subaru if he was also going to join the club, but he replied that he wasn't, as it was already late in the year. However, Hinata turned them down as he was not interested in joining the club. But then Sherry suddenly approached them, inviting Hinata to at least take a look at the club room. She was sure that it was worth it, and that he would change his mind about his decision. Subaru didn't quite understand why she was acting like a real teacher, even though she had only become one this morning. However, after school, the boys still visited the club room. The room was in a real mess, but despite this, it was full of magical objects. Hinata asked if they were the only ones in the club, and Deba replied something like that. But first, they wanted to introduce themselves. Deba Mitsuru, a second-year student from Class A and the club president, and next to him, Nishikori Miho, a second-year student from Class C. Mitsuru noted that initially there were 3 of them in the club, but one member left the group. It was Shu who left the club after being expelled. Everyone knows that their academy is a military school, so most students join here for training, and there are few clubs here. Most of them focus on skill practice, like a martial arts club. Therefore, when it comes to cultural clubs, such as the Magical Item Research Club, it is one of a kind. Subaru noted that if the student had initially wanted to do something ordinary, like club activities, he would not have entered the academy. Mitsuru replied that that was exactly it, which is why their club wasn't popular at all, and they didn't even have a promoter. Hinata asked if the club could become popular without a promoter, and Miho replied that there was one, but he left last year. However, they managed to continue their club activities, albeit unofficially. The director recently said that the academy can no longer fund a club without a promoter if there are only 2 people in it, so they will have to give back the club room. Akane asked if that was why they asked Teacher Sherry to be their promoter, and it turned out to be true. Sherry herself was not against it, provided that they invited Hinata to the club. But Hinata didn't understand why him, and the teacher replied that she thought he might need the cube with the artifact. She noted that magical items are devices that absorb the energy of magical crystal. Their power is immense, and as weapons, they can be effective even against monsters from other worlds. However, in real combat, they are used quite rarely because they are inferior to artifacts in many ways. Magic items cannot compare in power even to single-star artifacts, but this cube has challenged that belief. Sherry explained that the object she was holding was an object that could possess and steal someone's artifact. For now, they have decided not to disclose it to the public, but it is still necessary to come up with and take measures. The teacher said that they had discovered untapped potential in the magical item that they had yet to explore. So it seemed that in the future, more than just artifacts would be used in battles. Mitsuru added that this is not all, because magical items also make dreams come true and open up new possibilities. For example, this suit is a durable armor that absorbs the energy of magical crystals. But, despite its power, this armor is practically unsuitable for use. But with proper development, it will be possible to use it. Akane asked how exactly, and Mitsuru answered that it could be used to make a super robot. Subaru and Hinata were beside themselves with surprise. She wasn't surprised by the guy's reaction since they probably liked this kind of thing. But Sachi's reaction surprised her. Sherry noted that she doesn't know much about robots, but would like Hinata to join the club. And to be honest, she would like to train Hinata personally. Given the secrets of his artifact, if they manage to figure out how to extract the artifact from the cube, the club will be able to give it to Hinata as a bonus. Therefore, she would really like him to join. But if he is against it, she will not force him. Akane noted that it actually sounded good, and the festival was approaching. There is a festival between military academies where team battles will be held, and it would be a lot of fun to participate in it with the club members. Akane and Sherry's words managed to convince Hinata, and he replied that he agreed to join the club. Upon returning home, Hinata continued his training in the spirit world portal. He was able to reach another final stage of the portal, but he ran into difficulties. No matter how he tried to attack the monsters, it was all in vain. He was fast and could dodge their attacks, but he still lacked strength. Hinata even used a combination of the skills Revenge and Fist of Fury, but it didn't work. Ultimately, failure awaited him, followed by another death. Hinata didn't understand what he was doing wrong and where he could get more attack power. Besides, he lacked stamina, which is why he couldn't use the courage suit for a long time. Nanashi noted that he was doing badly. She thought he had grown a little, but he still had some room for improvement. She also said that he lacked something, namely special equipment. When he uses the new suit, even for a short time, he becomes stronger than most opponents. But this only applies to those he can damage. Therefore, against more resilient opponents, he is still powerless. And no matter how strong he is, he will not be able to defeat them. But even Hinata didn't quite understand what to do. But perhaps the update list would help him with this. Nanashi replied that it wouldn't help, and even learning a new skill wouldn't help him. The problem is that the power that the artifact can store is unchangeable. That's why he needs a technique like Shizuku's, which she has already mastered. Her artifact fills objects with vital energy, which increases their characteristics. However, instead of filling items, it converts this energy into attack. It can be called a special technique that uses the characteristics of the artifact, so he must also learn the power of his artifact and master his own unique technique. The next day, Hinata continued to think about Nanashi's words. A unique technique. It's not about combining skills and activating them, because he already used them, and it didn't work. Looking at Hinata's appearance, Subaru thought that something had happened to him. But Hinata replied that everything was fine. He was just thinking about a unique technique. But Subaru didn't understand what he was talking about, thinking that he hadn't woken up yet. Meanwhile, the teachers entered the classroom to make an important announcement. Students are probably already aware of the festival that will take place later this month, where each of their progress will be assessed. That's the official statement, but in essence, it's just a normal school festival, so they can have a good time. They're just students after all. This year's festival will be held in a spherical dome with a D-rank portal, and ordinary citizens will also be present, so students must behave respectfully. Subaru asked if they were just actors at the festival, but Sherry said it was gratitude for the citizens' support. Hinata inquired about how exactly their progress would be checked at the festival. Sherry explained to the students that there would be 2 events at the festival: individual battles and team battles. In individual battles, you can participate at your own discretion. However, team battles require membership in some club. The rules are mostly the same as for the final test, but there are additional ones for each year. Unfortunately, they will remain unknown until the event begins, so students will have to be patient. This worried the students because it looked dangerous, but Sherry assured them that everything would be fine. But just like at the final test, there would be security at the festival. Meanwhile, the Magical Item Research Club began its preparations for the festival. Akane was curious to know what exactly they would do at the festival. Mitsudo explained that the use of magic items was allowed for team battles at the festival, so if they could create a strong magic item now, they would have an advantage. They also planned to open a kiosk to raise funds to support the club. Akane asked what they sold last year, and Miho replied that they made yakisoba back then. Their kiosk looked quite interesting, and people were interested in watching the robot cook. However, it eventually exploded and caused a great deal of commotion. Akane noted that her artifact was only good for long-range combat, so she would like to obtain a magical item that would help her fight in close combat. Sachi, despite not being a member of any club, was still with the guys, and Subaru didn't understand why. But Mitsuru suggested that the guys listen to his short lecture on the abilities of magical items for beginners. But first, it would be nice if Hinata invited Miss Sherry here. Since they couldn't continue without a promoter, Hinata agreed, and Akane decided to go with him. On the way, Akane seemed to want to talk to him about something, but their dialogue was interrupted by strange screams. Several students from another school seemed to have started a fight right in the academy. Akane noted that these were guys from a military school, and Hinata noticed someone among them who looked like an old acquaintance of hers. The guys seemed to be saying something about the festival and the points that are awarded for participation. It seemed like it was just a verbal conflict, but suddenly one of the guys hit the girl, and Akane and Hinata couldn't just continue watching it. The girl, along with him, noted that this was too much, but the guy didn't care. He continued to pester the girl, grabbing her by the hair, saying that her actions could harm his reputation. It seemed like he wasn't very keen on her taking part in the festival since she was from Class D. He tried his best to force her to refuse to participate in the festival, but the girl did not want to. This made him even more angry. He didn't understand why she didn't refuse. Did she really need the points at the festival that much? The guy was so angry that he wanted to hit her again. However, at that moment, Hinata intervened and literally slammed the offender face into the ground. The girl was surprised when she saw Hinata and didn't even recognize him right away. The guy he hit wasn't happy about it and asked Hinata who he was to mess with him. He tried to punch him back, but it was no use, and Hinata was able to block his fist. Hinata introduced himself as an acquaintance of the girl he had just hit, and he would like to hear an apology to her for what he did. The offender did not understand where he got such strength from, because of which he could not even move his hand. However, the girl replied that everything was fine, and besides, it was her problem. She gave him the papers and told him to leave, and if they asked why he was late, to answer that it was because of her. But Hinata wasn't sure that everything would really be okay. But the girl replied that she didn't want to cause a commotion, and therefore lose points. Despite this, Hinata didn't quite understand why she was so worried about them. The girl thanked him for his help, noting that he was, as always, fair. Akane, who was watching all this from the side, did not quite understand what kind of relationship Hinata had with this girl. So she decided to ask Hinata what his relationship was with her. Hinata replied that the girl's name was Ren, and they were old acquaintances, just like with Shizuku. Hearing Shizuku's name, Ren wasn't very happy, saying that it seemed like she was working hard too, calling her stupid. But Hinata didn't quite understand what exactly Rin meant, but he didn't have the opportunity to ask about it. The girl said that it was time for her to leave, and she would be glad to meet him again at the festival. Meanwhile, upon returning to the Magic Item Research Club, Hinata told Sherry about what happened. However, what she was most interested in was whether Hinata had been able to adequately beat up his bullies, to which Subaru replied that it was unlikely that a teacher should say such a thing. Mitsuru noted that they must have been students from the Odin Military Academy, or Odi Academy for short, since they were the only ones who could study under the outdated point system. The teacher explained to the children that, unlike them, at ODI, they change classes depending on their grades. That's why they try to study harder and they graduate from the academy with exceptionally talented people. However, the students of this academy do not get along very well with each other. And Akane and Hinata were able to see this for themselves, seeing everything with their own eyes. Sherry noted that even in Deldoris, there are several ODI graduates, and many of them often refuse to work on the team. Some even set each other up to climb to the top. And Mitsuru added that this is precisely why many schools have abandoned such a grading system. As for someone setting someone up for the sake of reaching the top, Akane noted that Valkyrie is no better than them. Sherry asked Hinata if Ren would take part in the festival, since the organizers could also participate in team battles, and she was one of them. In that case, she will be a formidable opponent, since the ODI Academy will certainly try by all means to secure a victory for the sake of points. Miho said in a confident voice that they would never lose and would definitely win. After all, if they show better results in team battles, their club's funding will increase. However, Hinata didn't quite understand what Miss Sherry meant by formidable opponent. Meanwhile, Ren and Shizuku's paths crossed completely by chance. The atmosphere around them was not the best, and they did not even greet each other. The only thing Ren said then was calling Shizuku a murderer. Looking at her uniform, Shizuku realized that Ren had also entered a military academy, but a different one. Thanks to this, she became even more convinced that she was right. Meanwhile, in the classroom at Odi Academy, the group gathered to discuss the upcoming festival. The guy who had raised his hand to her back then was still angry, and wanted to ask her how she dared to humiliate him like that. He wanted to know who the guy who beat him was, and whether he was her friend. But Ren continued to ignore him, and in response to this, he decided to hit her again. But this time, she strangely dodged. Moreover, she was able to strike back with ease, as if slowing down time. It did seem strange, but Ren only said that it was because he hit her earlier. One of the guys from the group noted that the girl had been pretending before and had not dodged the blow on purpose. Otherwise, how could a person like her, who could dodge any attack, trip and scatter papers? But Ren only replied that she simply saw the person she had long wanted to see. Besides, when it comes to a person you care about, you always want to show your weak side. She also noted that she was pleasantly surprised, because back then, Hinata was quite strong and cool. The girl sitting next to them didn't understand what they were talking about, since Rin was only from Class D. However, this was not entirely true. She had recently transferred to a new academy, so due to her lack of points, she was placed in Class D. This girl is Takamine Rin, a former student of Class A at Oz Academy who owns a 4-star artifact. Meanwhile, at the Valkyrie Academy, everything went on as usual. Hinata continued to work hard, honing his artifact skills. But now, with the help of Sherry, Sachi always felt like his aura changed every time they met. And this time, it was nothing like before. Hinata had been honing every single one of his suits, including the Wrath suit, which he seemed to have completely mastered. His next training step was to hit as hard as possible without using any other skills. Hinata managed to score 1,258 points, and Sherry noted that with such immense power, he could finish off a D-rank enemy with one hit. Thanks to these trainings, Sherry was able to find out the rank of Hinata's artifact, and based on the data, its current rank is 3 stars. Akane couldn't believe it, saying he should have at least 4, if only because of his crazy sideways jumps. But Sherry replied that although his speed was truly impressive, his artifact rank was only 3 stars. Subaru was also surprised, because his artifact was of the same rank, and also began to think that such an assessment was not entirely accurate, while Akane's artifact rank was only 2 stars. Sachi, on the other hand, agreed with the ranking system since she possessed a 4-star artifact, but Akane denied it, saying that she could really defeat Hinata now. She replied that Akane was right. If she fought him now, she would most likely lose, but the artifacts were not valued by defeating her. Ms. Sherry added that the artifacts were created not to fight each other, but to prevent disasters caused by beings from other dimensions. What matters is how effective they are against these creatures, not against humans, and this determines the rank of the artifact. Lack of intelligence, attack power, and low damage lead to the need for recharging, which is why Hinata's artifact rating is so low. However, for Hinata's artifact, rank has no meaning. Sherry noted that Hinata's suit most likely replenishes its energy through stamina, and Hinata responded that it did. In that case, he should focus on developing endurance, which will help him prevent what happened recently. Hinata completely agreed with her, because the basic characteristics for the new suit were indeed lacking. To become even stronger and more resilient, Hinata will have to train a lot. For example, running 5,000 laps around the field, which Subaru considered crazy, thinking that Hinata would die faster that way. Before continuing training, Hinata would like to discuss one more thing regarding the unique technique, such as the finishing blow. Sherry told him that the artifact usually uses its inherent properties, as Nanashi had already said. In Hinata's case, he needs a technique that releases all of his accumulated power in one strike. Something like the Fist of Fury technique he got after unlocking the Fury suit. However, he wasn't sure if it was worth using, as he could only make a couple of hits. But after looking at the list of upgrades, he noticed that Fist of Fury now released all its accumulated power in one hit. Meanwhile, Shizuku continued to train diligently. While Hinata was improving his basic stats, she was learning to spot an enemy before they could attack. But she constantly believed that she was doing poorly, and that she needed to train even more and focus even more on the task. At that moment, strange thoughts crept into her head, reminding her of her past. At the same time, she remembered Rin's last words, who called her a murderer. But suddenly her training was interrupted by a powerful explosion. The one who arranged it was Haito, who was also training in the portal at that time. She asked what he wanted since he came here, and Haito replied that he came to ask her out on a date, but Shizuku refused, saying that he was not her type. But it was just a joke. In fact, he came to invite her to join the team battle at the festival. He noted that Chloe also wants to participate, because it seems like there will be someone on the team with whom he wants to compete. Haito said that it was a good idea to take part, because, like last time, a situation might arise where they would have to fight with people. Therefore, he noted that it is important to be prepared for a fight with a person. Shizuku agreed to take part despite all the differences. She was sure that Haito's words about the battle between people and Rin's appearance were not at all random. Shizuku also said that if he participated, he would definitely win, so he needed to be prepared. However, Haito had his own plans, but he did not reveal them and only replied that he would be glad to win with her on the team. Meanwhile, Hinata continued training inside Nanashi's portal, trying to defeat the monsters again and perfect his finishing blow. And it seems that the training under Sherry's guidance paid off, because he finally managed to defeat the monsters. Although it took a lot of effort. The day before the festival, the guys came to look at their club's stand. They were a little disoriented, but Mitsuru and Miho noticed them and shouted to come to them. Akane noted that they really chose a great location at the festival, but this place became available thanks to Miss Sherry's connections. Mitsuru was surprised when he didn't see Sachi with them and asked where she was. Subaru replied that since she wasn't a member of their club, she said she would focus on tasting the treats. In any case, the festival will take place tomorrow, and this year the Valkyrie, Odin, and Thor academies will join forces. Team battles will take place on the first day, and individual battles on the second. Sherry told the kids that the rules for team battles were on the printout they had been given yesterday, so it would be a good idea to review them. A team of 4 must collect as many crystals as possible and place them in a magical item to earn points. The team with the most points wins, so they will also have to compete against other teams. Each team member will have bracelets on their arms and legs. These are some kind of magical objects, each weighing 30 kilograms, and one of the team members must guard the capsule. The rest will attach 2 balls to their bodies, which will be their main weapons. Each time the balloon bursts, the bracelets increase their weight by 5 kilograms. Subaru asked if it was acceptable for them to have 30 kilograms on their arms and legs. It would be impossible to move with that kind of weight. Sherry added that if both of their balloons burst, they would be disqualified and would have to leave the portal immediately. Mitsuru noted that they first needed to deal with the opposing team's balls, and then with the capsule. Some teams will likely be eager to fight, so if a representative fails to defend the capsule, the team is finished. Sherry also told them that to avoid this, the strongest member of the team should become the representative. The clear favorite for this place, of course, was none other than Hinata. On the day of the festival, the square looked very lively. The number of people was simply incredible. This was not surprising, since today is the Military Academy Festival, in which 3 schools will take part. This event is held annually, but this year, tickets were given away in a lottery. The program's ratings have become very high, which confirms the festival's popularity. Meanwhile, the guys were preparing for the team battle, but in a peculiar way. Subaru asked if Miho was sure she didn't want to participate with them, but she replied that it was okay, since her artifact wasn't suitable for something like that. So she decided to focus on earning money for their club, although Akane was worried about whether she could handle it alone. Miho replied that there was no need to worry, since Hinata had said that he would bring one assistant to her, and this assistant was his younger sister, Hikari, who just happened to come to the festival. However, Hinata asked her not to push herself too hard, as this was the first time in a long time that she had visited such an active place. Akane was very surprised when she learned that Hinata had a younger sister. He replied that it was true, but she had just spent some time in the hospital. But despite this, she would soon recover, and the doctors were not against letting her go. Meanwhile, the team battles were announced to begin soon, and the students were asked to gather at the entrance to the portal. Hinata apologized to Hikari for not having time to talk because they had to go, but it was okay since Hikari had come here to help. So from that time on, Hikari was completely under Miho's responsibility. The guys headed towards the portal so as not to be late and not miss the battles. Hikari also applied to the academy and will be able to study next year, but Hinata didn't know about this yet. On the way to the portal, they met Shizuku's group, but their welcome was not the warmest. Seeing Hinata next to Mitsuru, she said that Hinata really did join the Magic Item Research Club. The atmosphere around her was quite unpleasant, but Hinata asked if she would participate in the team battle. Shizuku replied that yes, she was invited, and if she participated, she would definitely win. Even though it's just a regular festival, why not show off your skills again? Her behavior made the boys even more angry, and they didn't understand why she was acting with them as if they had already lost. But Shizuku only replied that they had no chance, and she truly felt sorry for Mitsuru for his team. Mitsuru replied that this was not the case, because in a team battle, it was not only strength that was important. First and foremost, it was a test of trust between team members. And since their captain is a good and reliable man, he is confident that their strength will exceed all her expectations. However, Shizuku had a completely different opinion, stating that the only thing that was important was a reliable force that would not drag the team down. At this time, Miss Shuri announced the start of tag team battles, and most were surprised to learn that she had actually retired. She also said that, even though it is a festival, one should not forget about safety, so in an emergency, participants can rely on Deldoras. They have neutralized the portal's bosses, so it is important for the participants not to damage its base. Participants will have an hour, and for the first 10 minutes, combat between teams is prohibited, as is killing. They only need to destroy the opponent's balls. If they cause serious injury to anyone, they will be disqualified, so you have to fight smart. Now that everyone understands everything, there is no point in delaying anyone. It's time to get started. After this, all teams rushed into the portal to take advantageous positions as quickly as possible. It was just a D-rank portal called Giant Branch Forest, so defeating the local monsters wasn't difficult for the boys. Besides, thanks to Hinata's suit, it seemed like he could handle the task alone. However, the suit still drained him greatly, and he couldn't use it for long. Mitsuru asked what the situation was like, and Hinata replied that there was no one around, but they should remain vigilant. 10 minutes have passed since entering the portal, and now a collision with other participants may occur. In team battles, it's best to avoid clashes and instead focus on collecting magic crystals. The guys wanted to believe that they would be able to get through this festival peacefully. However, at that moment, the ball on Akane's right hand burst. Someone shot at him from a very long distance. These were the guys from the One Academy who were targeting not only the team, but also Hinata. The spectators were delighted that after 10 minutes, one of the teams was already attacking the other. Sherry wasn't thrilled, reminding them that she'd asked them to be more careful. But Jean pointed out that there was nothing they could do about it. Hinata was unable to react to the attack, meaning they were in possession of some sort of artifact. Teacher Gonzo also noted that it was truly impressive. The shooter was Hanasaki Reiko from Class B of the Academy 1. She was quite accurate, and her artifact did not even make a sound. She was truly a silent sniper. Sherry noted that it seemed like the students at this academy specialized in combat abilities, but now Hinata and the others understood their situation. Meanwhile, Jin continued to monitor the situation to ensure that no incidents occurred. He had to be sure that something like what happened at the re-exam would not happen again. But something was bothering him, and his worries turned out to be justified. Suddenly, the portal's base cracked, but unfortunately, no one was able to notice it. But the guys from the Odin Academy weren't going to stop there, and wanted to burst as many of their opponents' balloons as possible. Their main target was Hinata, especially because of what happened the other day. Watching through binoculars, they also noticed Mitsuru, and despite him being a second year from Class A, they didn't think he was a strong opponent. However, they suddenly disappeared from sight after using a magic item, and Reiko was unable to aim properly. At that moment, they heard a strange sound that seemed to come from behind, and they weren't imagining it because, having lowered their guard, they immediately found themselves in Hinata's field of vision. They couldn't believe how he managed to get to them so quickly, because just a second ago he was several hundred meters away from them. He managed to burst the balloon of one of his opponents before they could escape. Of course, Hinata couldn't let them go and rushed after them, but certain difficulties arose. The boys weren't stupid either and had prepared in advance, setting up traps around them made of thin threads, the breaking of which could lead to death. Because of these threads, Hinata wouldn't be able to move freely, no matter how fast he was. The guy noted that this was all thanks to his 3-star artifact, Territory Expansion. At that moment, he was able to release another thread, and if Hinata had slowed down even for a second, he would have been dead. Thanks to this trick, they were able to trap him. Or so they thought. In fact, Subaru came to Hinata's aid and easily cut the threads with his knife. Since their attention was only focused on Hinata, they forgot about the other members of his team. This turned out to be a mistake, which allowed the boys to easily surround them. This was far from what the guys from the Odin Academy expected. They didn't think that their opponents would have an artifact capable of cutting such invisible threads. However, except for Mitsuda, everyone was sure that he was somewhere nearby, although Hinata did not know where he was. Mitsuru, meanwhile, was fighting another member of the Odin Academy, asking the others to trust him. Therefore, it was now important for the boys to complete their task without losing the ball. Hinata noted that since these were the students from the One Academy, whom he had seen before, then Rin should be somewhere here too. At first, he thought she would fight Mitsuda, but he was sure she was nearby, even though he couldn't sense her presence. And his suspicions were correct. Rin was right behind him. He was only able to notice her at the last minute, and it seemed that she knew about his attention. She immediately attacked Subaru, bursting 2 of his balloons at once, and thus disqualifying him. No one had time to understand what had happened, but Rin only said that in the end, it was all a competition. Hinata didn't expect Rin to appear so suddenly, and with such an attack. Akane threw a magical item at the boys, which was a kind of smoke grenade, to buy them time to regroup. While the enemies were letting their guard down, Hinata grabbed Akane and started running. Akane didn't understand why he was running away, but Hinata replied that it was important for them to increase their distance now. Besides, without Subaru's artifact, he wouldn't have been able to deal with that guy's artifact. Hinata acted rather carelessly when he launched his attack, but he didn't understand how Rin was able to get so close to them. Rin was also impressed, as she tried to hide her presence, but Hinata still sensed her. Subaru asked if the knife was her artifact, to which Rin replied that it was not. This knife wasn't even capable of cutting through a normal school uniform, but it was enough to pop the balloon. Although Subaru didn't understand how she managed to get so close. Rin replied that she had been here from the very beginning, and it was the other way around, that they had shortened the distance and come to her. The other members of her team thought that she would run after Hinata and Akane, but she had other plans. After all, even if they catch them, it doesn't really matter. It's much more interesting to find the rest. Meanwhile, Hinata and Akane walk straight into Chloe and Akino's arms, who are just hunting them. At this time, Shizuku and Haito went together, and she didn't understand what Chloe and Akino were thinking. Haito replied that they were simply more focused on their personal rivals than on the team battle. She also asked Haito who his opponent was then, and he immediately replied that it was Hinata. Shizuku noted that this was the right thing to do since someone had to teach him a lesson. He completely forgot that their goal was not victory at any cost, but that one defeat could mean losing everything. This is why you can't win recklessly by rushing into battle, because you could die. Shizuku also said that weaklings should be among weaklings instead of trying to climb to the top. And suddenly Rin approached them, noting that Shizuku's words about a single defeat were true. But if that was the case, then why was Shizuku still alive? That was what she wanted to know. Rin replied that it was because Shizuku was a rare creature who would take any chance to survive. Shizuku asked Haito not to come any closer, telling Rin that if she was a beast, then she was one too. After all, she couldn't do anything herself, but she still continued to blame others. These words angered her. Rin rushed into battle without any hesitation, heading straight for Shizuka. However, just like with Hinata, she was unable to defeat or outsmart Shizuka. Unlike Hinata, Shizuku had a more powerful attack power that Rin found difficult to handle. Shizuku noted that Rin can see into the future for a period of 4 to 5 seconds. Rin replied that it was, and she expected nothing less from Shizuku. Rin's artifact is Reverse Vision, which significantly enhances her physical abilities and allows her to predict the future. It's truly one of the best support artifacts, but even if it can predict the future, without the ability to respond to an attack, it's useless. However, Shizuku was deeply mistaken in thinking about Rin's artifact so frivolously. She can see 5 seconds into the future only if she is not involved in combat, in which case her predictions become significantly more accurate. And Shizuku didn't even notice how Rin was able to burst 2 balloons, effectively turning her into a walking anchor. Haito watched the proceedings and wondered if the artifact would cause trouble for Rin. At that moment, Rin looked straight at him, as if telling him to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Haito immediately understood her hint and took her side, betraying Shizuka. At this time, Mitsuru was also having a hard time. At first glance, his opponent was much stronger. He continued to attack him without stopping, giving him no time to rest. The enemy was confident of his team's victory, but Mitsuru had a completely different opinion, stating that in battle, not only strength, but also luck is important. His team is superior to them in every way, but not all of their balls are broken, and they are far from weak. Suddenly, Mitsuru took out something that looked like a magical item or artifact and stabbed himself with it. The enemy did not expect this and was surprised that Mitsuru used his artifact only now. Mitsuru noted that this was the Hulk steroid artifact, which had a strong but short-lived effect. But now this effect will last until the end of the team fight, and all the efforts of his team will pay off with his fists. The situation between Rin and Shizuku escalated, as she now wanted to take revenge on her for everything she had done. On that hellish day, Rin lost everything, and the only thing she had left was her twin sister, Ren. The two of them tried to save themselves, and then it seemed to them that their lives would end right there. Ren then decided that one day she would become stronger and destroy all the creatures from another world to take revenge. But at some point, everything turned out not to be so hopeless when Shizuku and Hinata found them, and they seemed to have hope. That day, they truly met their comrades in misfortune. From then on, they began to study and train together, helping each other overcome difficulties. Shizuku and Rin became real friends, and then it seemed to her that life was gradually getting better. They made it clear that there is no need to despair even in the most hopeless situations, because a way out can always be found. School days were warm and joyful, and they all gradually began to forget about the tragedy that had happened. However, the horrors did not end there, and before they became warriors, they had to survive another catastrophe. When it seemed that the most terrible and difficult stage was already behind us, life again and again threw up trials. Hinata was able to save Rin, and they escaped the school together. After a while, they saw several more students leaving the school, but neither Ren nor Shizuku were among them. And then, from behind the smoke, Shizuku's silhouette began to emerge, but Ren was not with her. The other children suddenly started blaming Shizuka for everything, saying that she sacrificed everyone to save herself. They screamed that it was she who pushed other children into the arms of monsters. From then on, everyone started to hate her, but Ren still didn't understand where her sister was. She refused to believe the other children's words, considering them lies, and asked Shizuku where Ren was. Shizuku didn't know how to answer, so she simply told the truth. Rin was dead. That day, Rin lost everything. Her last loved one. Meanwhile, Hinata continued to fight Chloe, who was so eager to fight him. Besides Chloe, Akino also intervened in the fight. But this was not a problem for Hinata. Akane helped him fight off the girl with the puppeteer artifact, easily repelling her attacks. Together they worked harmoniously, and their team spirit was high. However, Akino didn't understand why Chloe didn't deal with Akane first, since then they would be able to easily overcome Hinata with numbers. Besides, it was because of her that she lost one ball. And if she loses another one, she will be disqualified. Meanwhile, the thing was that Chloe was having trouble and couldn't get a hit done. Hinata kept dodging his blades, and Chloe couldn't understand how he did it. But Hinata also had problems, as the blades prevented him from getting close enough to attack. Chloe knew that Hinata wouldn't be able to counter his blade's attack, so all he had to do was wait for his opponent to open up. However, at that moment, something strange happened. The world around began to distort, as if the portal was starting to close. Even Nanashi noticed these changes, saying that it was too early for the portal to close since the stage was not yet complete. Shizuku also felt this strange sensation, but she still didn't understand what was happening. Rin seemed to know something, but didn't say anything, only noting that from this moment on, Shizuku would be in big trouble. At that moment, Haito exploded his balls, and due to their weight, Shizuku was unable to move. She didn't understand why he betrayed her, because at first glance, he seemed like an ordinary guy. Rin noted that they might be mistaken for accomplices, so it might be best for her to leave. But Shizuku didn't want to let her go and demanded to know what she was going to do. Rin replied that she wasn't going to do anything herself. Haito would do everything for her. He came close enough to her, but Shizuku managed to react and fight back, despite the weight. Haito had expected this, so he had prepared another plan in advance. He had planted an invisible explosive on the balloon of each of the team members. When they all exploded, Shizuku was no longer able to move, as if she was chained to the ground. She understood exactly what he had done, so she asked him what he was planning. Haito replied that he simply blew up Akino and Chloe's balloons with his snake bomb, which is hard to spot if it's well hidden. None of the guys expected this, and they were extremely shocked. However, he did this not only to defeat them, but also to weaken Shizuka. In the end, he was going to take her artifact in the same way that the artifact was taken from Sherry. Shizuka was surprised to realize that it was the same dart that had been aimed at Sherry back then. But Haito said that she shouldn't be so surprised, since there were already bad rumors about him. He added that she must have understood the risks when she allowed him to get so close. Haito also admitted that he had been a member of Nibelheim long before entering the academy. He explained that it was best to steal the artifact before it grew, which is why he was sent here to cover all traces of the festival. That was their plan from the start, and it looks like they've succeeded. Shizuku thought that Rin was involved in this too, but she just said that it had nothing to do with it. She was just a victim who would abandon her and run away. She added that it was like when Shizuku abandoned Rin. Rin also warned that there was no need to expect help, since the others were now in the epicenter of a huge monster outbreak. No one understood what had happened, but one thing was clear. The students in the portal needed to be rescued immediately. Sherry couldn't believe what was happening, because this was the first time something like this had happened. Either her eyes were deceiving her, or the D-rank portal had turned into a higher tier portal, and the monsters coming out had become B-rank. It became too dangerous near the portal, and Jin told Sherry to get as far away as possible and help the others evacuate. A little more and the monster would have attacked her, but at that moment, Gonzo arrived in time. No one expected this at the festival, and Sherry sincerely hoped that everyone would survive. Meanwhile, Rin said that she would also leave, since it was not safe to stay even outside the portal. However, Haito was confused about what kind of monster outbreak the girl was talking about, since the boss had told him something else. But one way or another, he had already stolen Shizuku's artifact, and this could not but please him. The first part of Haito's plan was completed, but he had no intention of stopping there. After all, his plan also included stealing Hinata's artifact, which the guild boss had taken a fancy to. He thought he could pull it off without any trouble, but then everything went wrong. A monster suddenly appeared and attacked him, causing him to drop Shizuku's artifact, which landed right at her feet. Haito didn't understand where the monster got such strength from, because even as a cub, he was a B rank, and he appeared in a D rank portal. At that moment, the head of Nibelheim informed him that the plan was changing and that he needed to leave immediately. Haito didn't want to retreat because they had prepared for so long, but the boss ordered him to leave immediately if he didn't want to die. In the end, Haito decided to back down, telling Shizuku that he didn't intend to kill her, but it seemed like her luck had run out. He used a shadow trick to instantly leave the portal. At this time, Shizuku tried to get her artifact back, but it was useless. Besides, the monster was already standing right in front of her, and it seemed to her that this was the end. She thought that perhaps this was payback for that day and her obsession with power. Shizuku was in despair, and it looked like she wouldn't be able to keep her promise to Ren. And when it seemed that everything was over, at that moment, Hinata appeared and repelled the monster's attack. Shizuku was shocked to see him, not understanding what he was doing there. Suddenly, Akino's toy, which helps them find each other, came out of her pocket. Hinata said that Chloe gave him this toy, adding that it would help find her. However, Shizuku didn't understand why he came, and not Chloe or Akino. Hinata explained that at first they didn't understand anything either, and didn't know what to do. Akane said that enemies like these usually appear in B-rank portals, but they are in D-rank. Hinata noted that in that case, they had better get out of here as quickly as possible. Then Chloe gave him the toy, saying that it would help find Shizuku. He noted that if he or Aquino ran, it would take too long, but Akane didn't understand his intentions and thought that they were hiding something. Chloe said that he had helped Haito fight strong opponents a couple of times before. He didn't know his true face, but he was sure that he was hiding something. And he was right. Their suddenly bursting balloons were proof of that, and it looked like he was now targeting Shizuka. Akane didn't agree with them and didn't understand why they had to save her. Despite this, Chloe asked Hinata to do it, and in the meantime, they would take her out of the portal. Hinata asked him if he wasn't on Haito's side since he helped him. Chloe replied that he didn't care about the others because people thought he was a jerk and a bully and spread bad rumors about him. However, he has never been one to abandon his comrades in trouble so easily. So he asks Hinata for help. After that, Hinata rushed to look for Shizuku, and fortunately, made it in time. But Shizuku didn't understand why he was doing this, and told him to run away, because he could die at the hands of the monster. However, Hinata had no plans to leave, much less give up. Shizuku looked at this, and wondered whether Hinata was either too stupid or overestimating his strength, and shouted at him to leave. But Hinata said that he would not run away and would fight to the end. He always regretted that day and asked himself why he didn't come back for her and Ren himself. He didn't know what happened back then, but from then on, he noticed how Shizuku was relentlessly striving for power. Shizuku replied that it was true, and this is what it led to. Now she is exhausted and one step away from death. She also admitted that she was cruel even to him, constantly neglecting him. The others hated her too, saying they would stop going to school just because of her presence. She considered Hinata to be a thorn in her side, and therefore believed that she deserved to die like that. But he replied that this was not so, and no matter how badly others spoke about her, he did not care. Because the Shizuku he knows has always been and will always be a person who cares about those around her, just like she had always helped him since their early childhood. And then I secretly watched as he trained and became stronger. So no matter what, for him, Shizuku will always remain a good person. His words touched Shizuka, and she felt even more ashamed of everything she had done. Meanwhile, Hinata continued to try to defeat the monster, thinking that he could do it without difficulty. He managed to get close and strike, but it wasn't enough. The monster attacked back, throwing Hinata as far away from itself as possible. Hinata realized that this was not enough, and the time had come to use that very decisive blow that he used in Nanashi's portal. However, this required time, effort, and tremendous endurance, but Hinata was willing to sacrifice it. To deliver the most powerful blow possible, he needed to accumulate maximum force by pushing off the ground faster and faster. Using acceleration, he had to accelerate all his power and then strike straight at the monster. And he succeeded. Hinata was able to accumulate and concentrate a huge amount of power. He charged at the monster, and Shizuku thought he was going to die. But she was shocked to see what Hinata had become. With a powerful blow, he pierced the monster through and through, leaving a huge hole in its body, thereby defeating it and saving his friend. A powerful explosion formed in the place of the monster. This is all that remained of it after Hinata's strike. As expected, such an attack was very draining, even though Hinata had improved his basic skills. Shizuku couldn't believe what she saw, thinking that perhaps she was mistaken. And it all started on the very day when their school was attacked by monsters. The day of a great catastrophe. Then Shizuku took on the role of leader and ordered the children to quickly turn over their desks and barricade themselves. They managed to build a small wall to protect themselves from the monsters. Shizuku told the others not to move or make any unnecessary noise under any circumstances. And some didn't understand why they couldn't just up and run away as quickly as possible. Shizuku explained to them that these monsters only react to movement, so it was better for them to sit there in silence. She also noted that these monsters have poor eyesight and learned about this from books. However, the girl found this strange because she didn't have any artifact for battle, so why would she know about such a thing? Ren doubted her plan, but she was still more inclined to think that they should run away as quickly as possible. But Shizuku convinced her, saying that it was better to wait because someone should come for them. At some point, one of the monsters noticed them and began to dismantle the barricade. One of the girls got very scared and ran wherever her eyes looked. The monster immediately reacted and rushed at her, but Shizuku jumped on it and saved her classmate. Despite her request that no one move, everyone rushed to the exit. At that moment, the creature grabbed Shizuku, and she thought she was about to die. However, the monster threw her, and she fell right into the running girls. Shizuku continued to shout at the others not to move, otherwise they would not survive. But one of the girls kicked her onto the monster's feet in order to escape with her friend. Shizuku felt like it was all over for her, and the monsters were about to kill her. However, at the moment she was attacked, Ren jumped in front of the attack, saving her friend. Shizuku couldn't believe that one of her best friends had died right before her eyes. While the other children ran away, she was in a state of shock and couldn't even move. She didn't understand why Ren did this, but she asked her to promise to become stronger and someday kill all the monsters from the other world. At that time, Shizuku didn't know whose fault it was for what happened. Perhaps those who ran away. But then she realized that everyone was desperately trying to survive, and she herself expected the same. So Shizuku decided that it was only her fault that she had hoped for help from people like them, and also in her weakness, because even now she turned out to be useless. Hinata asked if she was the one who said that weakness only hinders them. But back then, at school, it seemed like everyone was weak. So did she really mean to say that Ren was weak too? His words made her even more emotional, and she replied that this was not so. After all, in reality, neither Ren, nor he, nor Rin were ever weaklings. They continued to fight until the last, as long as they had strength left. Then Shizuku realized that she had been deeply mistaken all this time, and she felt sincerely sorry. However, Hinata said that they should hurry and get out of here, because he himself does not understand what is happening now. Shizuku was exhausted, lost her artifact, and could not move. Hinata understood everything and told her to climb on his back so that they could get to the exit together. She asked if it would be difficult for him since he had changed his suit again. Hinata replied that even so, he would still continue to protect her. Along the way, Shizuku admitted that she had been disappointed in him from the very beginning, without knowing why. Perhaps because she had high expectations, and she also thought he was a fool since he was always getting into fights. Hinata agreed, saying that she was right. He was just much more stubborn than she thought. Suddenly, a monster appeared in front of them, and in their condition, it would have been extremely difficult to deal with. But at that very moment, Mitsuru jumped out of the forest and killed the monster with one blow. Hinata and Shizuku were surprised, and at the same time glad that he arrived on time. Meanwhile, the Deldoras continued the evacuation, and fortunately, almost no one was injured. Hinata and Shizuku also got out of the portal, albeit with great difficulty. Chloe noted that they arrived just in time, as he had expected, since Hinata had not let him down. However, Hinata replied that he would still argue that they made it on time. Chloe didn't understand what he was talking about, and asked him again what he meant. Then Shizuku showed the artifact, which was now trapped in a cube, and it became clear to everyone. Chloe's fears were confirmed, and he understood why Haito hadn't fought back then. Shizuku thanked Chloe and Akino for their help, because without them, she would have already died. Chloe replied that everything was fine, especially since he himself was in her debt. Only Hinata and Shizuku returned from the portal, and Akane was alarmed when she didn't see Mitsuru with them. Hinata explained that he was okay, and thanks to Mitsuru, he and Shizuku were able to get out. He is currently in the medical bay, as he lost consciousness immediately after leaving. Subaru called him a bungler because he fainted as soon as he returned. But Hinata asked him not to talk about Mitsuru like that, because he was much stronger than he seemed. If it weren't for his power, it's unknown if they would have been able to get out of the portal alive. Hinata noted that Mitsuri was such a good guy that he almost cried. His artifact turned out to be so powerful that he was able to break the bracelets without any difficulty. Maho joined them and said that the relic of their club president was very powerful, but it could only be used for a short time. Hikari and Sherry also came with Maho, and they were glad to see that the boys were okay. Sherry noted that outside the dome, not many people were injured thanks to the prompt action. The portal was located right where most of the Deldoras Guild was located. However, there were no exact reasons for what happened. and no one could determine them. It was only clear that such a precedent had never happened before. Hikari was happy to see Shizuku, saying that she had changed a lot since their last meeting and had become unusually strong. Shizuku thanked her, adding that after such a battle, she could use some rest. Sherry asked if Shizuku was planning to go to Nibelheim. This was true because she did not know how to return the artifact and believed that the answer could only be found there. Miss Sherry was surprised to learn that Haito was from Nibelheim, as that meant that the Thieves Guild had now infiltrated the academy as well. Shizuku said that they had completely different plans, and they themselves had no idea that everything would turn out this way. However, the only one who could have known this in advance was most likely Rin. Shizuku realized that since Rin could predict the future, she knew for sure that Hinata would come to save her. But even so, she didn't understand what exactly Rin had in mind. Only one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Sherry also asked if the boys had managed to retrieve the weapon that Haito had used to take the relic. But unfortunately, Haito dropped it when he was attacked, and there was no time to look for it. At this time, the teacher received a call and was informed that Haito had managed to take the magical weapon with which he had stolen the artifact with him. However, if they find it, they will be able to quickly return the sealed artifacts. If everything goes well, Shizuku and Hinata will get their artifacts back. When talking about Hinata's artifact, Sherry was referring to the shield artifact that belonged to his father. And whether to use it or not is up to Hinata himself and no one else. Meanwhile, the internet continued to buzz with discussion about the incident, and many heard about an organization called Nibelheim for the first time. After the portal core was destroyed, it was immediately closed, and the military festival was, of course, cancelled. Hinata initially believed that Nibelheim was behind it, but something much stranger was going on. Nanashi noted that the portal had entered its second phase, and such incidents would continue to occur indefinitely in the future. Over time, increasingly dangerous portals will begin to appear, significantly more complex than those that came before. Hinata asked her how she knew this, but Nanashi replied that she couldn't say, because if she told, they would see it. And this made Hinata have even more questions. Meanwhile, Nanashi opened another portal, and Hinata received the key to the truth, allowing him to enter the test portal under the code word Veritas. Nanashi, without really explaining anything, said that there was almost no time left, and she would wait for him at the farthest point. When he gets to her, she will explain everything, and if it turns out to be true, he will then be able to find her. Until then, she will wait impatiently for him and hope that she was not mistaken. The next morning, Hinata went to the academy and was surprised when he noticed Akane and Subaru in the crowd of students. The reason for this overcrowding was the emergence of many new internship programs. There was no official announcement yet, but new portals appeared one after another. Subaru noted that this was probably related to that incident at the festival. Mitsuri also joined them, saying that the requirements for interns had also become stricter. Akane asked if he was okay after what happened. He replied that there was no reason to worry, because this always happens to him after using the artifact. Hinata asked him what the new requirements were for trainees, and one of them was to be a mercenary without a guild. Subaru asked who this mercenary was and how that happened, and Akane reminded him that they had covered this in the school curriculum, but he, as usual, slept during classes. Akane explained that mercenaries are people with official permission to enter portals and can perform various tasks depending on their reputation. Requests to destroy portals come from the state, and they are mainly handled by members of large guilds. But the number of new portals has already exceeded the guild's capabilities. That's why students are now called mercenaries without guilds. Also, if they complete a C rank or higher portal destruction internship, they can receive official approval before graduation, like he did. Hinata noticed that most of the requests came from the Phoenix Guild. Mitsuri replied that in that case, they deal with most of the portals, which is not surprising since they are an S-rank guild. However, Hinata had her own scores to settle with the Phoenix Guild, namely Genji. He didn't understand how they had so many participants to handle so many requests at once. After the festival, Shizuku's school life changed a lot. Her classmates started to discuss her right in front of her, reminding her every time that she could no longer use the artifact. They didn't understand why she hadn't dropped out yet. Couldn't she forget what it was like to be the best in her class? But among the crowd of haters, there were also those who treated her with understanding. Sachi tried to cheer her up so she wouldn't be so sad, but this only irritated Shizuku. She tried to help and told her not to pay attention to the unpleasant words. Shizuku didn't understand why everyone had changed their minds about her so quickly, and asked Sachi if she also thought that this was her payment. Sachi was frank with her, saying that Shizuku rarely listens to others, and once she makes a decision, she doesn't back down. She has a really difficult personality, which makes her hard to get along with, and her condescending behavior is not the best, to say the least. But despite all this, she continues to work much harder than others. Sachi said that Shizuku, who was now sitting in front of her, looked like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. And such a Shizuku will never lose to anyone again, so there is no point in mocking her. Sachi added that if Shizuku returned her artifact, then she would definitely allow her to join her, as if parodying Shizuku herself. Chloe and Akino also remained by Shizuku's side, despite her losing her artifact. They talked about how someone wants to join their team, their opinion matters too, because they are all one team. At this time, the Phoenix Guild was in full swing, and destroying portals became their main task. Jinji couldn't stop laughing with joy, because while for some the opening of new portals is a disaster, for him it was a gold mine. Who would have thought that one day everything would turn out like this, and he would be able to earn millions just by clearing portals? However, this would not have happened if he had continued to act alone, so he formed an alliance with the boss of the Thieves Guild. So he owed his success to Magenta, the head of Nibelheim, even though he had asked him to do without the fawning. Jinji noted that even the weakest person can become useful if you give him a powerful artifact. He came up with a new way to make money, taking powerful artifacts, like those from Sherry, and giving them to the weak, and in case of death, simply taking them back. When Jinji first heard about the incident at the festival, he was very scared. But it was thanks to this incident that he would soon shine in a new way.